Chapter 141, Action. Nathan sprinted across the battlefield, weaving through the chaos of clashing weapons and swirling dust. 10 minutes earlier, he'd broken away from his comrades, determined to cut off any stragglers fleeing the main fight. Now he rounded a scorched boulder and froze. A lone Iwagakure Jinin crept forward, head down, clearly intent on rejoining his unit. Nathan's pulse quickened. He took a cautious step, then stopped himself. What if this was a trap? With a furtive breath, he activated his Sharingan and swept the terrain with his crimson glare. Among tumbled rocks and splintered trees, there was no sign of enemy reinforcements or hidden shinobi. Am I imagining things? He wondered. He slipped into the shadows and crouched behind a shattered pillar, watching the Genin's every move. 2 minutes passed. The junior ninja pressed onward, oblivious to Nathan's scrutiny, desperately trying to close the distance toward his own lines. Nathan exhaled and made his choice. Forming the ox hand seal, he vanished in a blur with his body flicker technique. In an instant, he reappeared directly behind the unsuspecting foe. With a swift, practiced motion, Nathan drew a kunai and drove it into the Genin's left shoulder. Wood splintered, blood blossomed, and the young shinobi collapsed. Nathan didn't linger. He stayed perfectly still, senses blazing, scanning every direction. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. A full minute ticked by under his watchful guard. Finally, Nathan allowed himself a grim nod. There were no hidden enemies here, just a single, unfortunate soldier who had stepped too far from his comrades. It wasn't bait, it was simply war. I've been battling thin air with nothing but my own bravado. Nathan shook his head, dismissing the thought, then hoisted the unconscious rock ninja over his shoulder and slipped into the denser trees. Deeper in the woods, he found a secluded spot, dropped his quarry to the ground, and delivered 2 sharp strikes to his chest. The ninja jerked awake, just as Nathan was ready. Before the man could form words, Nathan activated his Sharingan Genjutsu, forcing him to recall everything Nathan needed to know. Minutes passed in silence before the trance ended. The captive's name was Ishiki Ichiro. He'd been separated from his squad after stumbling into a cloud ninja illusion during their last clash. While his allies had long since fallen, no one came back for him, and he remained hidden, alive but unconscious, until Nathan discovered him. Nathan paused, incredulous at how simple the truth was. People had an annoying habit of overthinking everything. Still, he felt no shame. If the same situation arose again, he'd do exactly what he did today. A few extra minutes of caution were worth more than a man's life. After all, who could be certain the next discovery wasn't an even deadlier trap? Nathan tensed, reminding himself that there was no room for carelessness now. He watched Ishiki Ichiro, still lost in her illusion, and realized her experience and skill could be invaluable if she survived. A plan formed in his mind. Swiftly, he wove the hand seals, pressing his palm against the back of her head. Quietly, he activated the chakra absorption technique. Unlike the cautious taps he'd used before to heal wounded Rocknine, this time he poured every ounce of his will into drawing her energy out, hoping she wouldn't notice. In under 2 seconds, Ishiki's chakra reserves were gone. But Nathan didn't stop there. He delved deeper, siphoning the faint currents of her spiritual and physical energy, converting them into chakra he could store within himself. His heart pounded as he maintained the seal, pushing his Genin body past its usual limits. Finally, Nathan released his hand. He stumbled back, breath ragged, as Ishiki slumped forward. Her face ashen, her breathing shallow. She was on the brink of death and had no chakra left to draw on. Nathan steadied himself, adrenaline still coursing through his veins, and prepared for whatever he must do next. Crack! Nathan's hands moved in a blur. He snapped the enemy's neck, forced the corpse to the ground, then formed a tight seal. With a roar of chakra, he unleashed fire-style, great fireball technique, engulfing the body in blistering flames. When the fire died down, he molded a second set of seals and activated the transformation technique, taking on the fallen ninja's face and form. Silently, he stepped back onto the patrol path. All around him lay bodies, Cloud Village shinobi and Rock Village ninjas, piled and strewn beneath the trees. Strangely, none were merely wounded. If any Cloud shinobi had survived, their comrades would have evacuated them long ago, or finished the job themselves. But on Rock Village territory, injured fighters should still be agonizing nearby. Why was every single one dead? Nathan paused, heart pounding. He scanned the dense jungle with sharpened senses. A faint, pained groan drifted on the wind, an echo of the cries he'd heard countless times over the last 24 hours. It was familiar. Without a second thought, he melted into the underbrush and headed toward the sound. Suddenly, a kunai whistled through the air, embedding itself deep in a tree trunk just inches from his head. Nathan stiffened, every muscle coiled. Someone was here, and they'd seen right through his disguise. Nathan peered up at the treetops, tracking the trajectory of the thrown kunai. Perched on a sturdy branch above him stood a rock village shinobi, his arms folded as he stared down with icy scrutiny. "State your name, your team number, and why you're here," the Iwagakure ninja demanded, his tone so cold it felt like a blade against Nathan's throat. Suppressing a tremor, Nathan lowered his gaze and forced a frightened nod. "I'm Ishiki Ichiro of Team E379. During the battle earlier, I triggered an illusion and got separated from my squad. When I came to, there was no one around, so I hurried back toward the front lines. I only stopped here because I heard a noise and wanted to investigate." The rock village shinobi said nothing, his dark eyes roaming over Nathan's face as though weighing every word for truth. After a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice razor-sharp. "You don't belong here, Ishiki Ichiro. As a ninja, you're ordered to return to your team and engage the enemy immediately. Is that understood?" "Crystal clear," Nathan replied, relief flooding him. He spun on his heel and dashed into the undergrowth, eager to put distance between himself and the silent sentinel above. The jonin from Iwagakure barked, "Wait a minute, you." Before he could finish, Nathan's Sharingan flared to life, the three Magatama spinning in his eyes. The jonin, though wary, had never suspected Nathan possessed such a dojutsu. The instant their gazes locked, the jonin fell under Nathan's genjutsu. Swish, 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 3 shurikens tore through the air. The jonin snapped out of the trance just in time to block one, but the other 2 struck home. One buried itself in his left arm, the other slammed into his right leg, crippling his sealing ability and any hope of retreat. Nathan didn't hesitate. He vanished in a blur, the result of his body flicker technique, and reappeared at lightning speed. He already had his dagger in hand. Behind him, several kunai thudded into the ground where he'd just been standing, proof he wasn't alone in this battle. But none of that mattered now. The true threat was before him, and as soon as Nathan dealt with him, the rest would be powerless to stop him. Nathan had already gauged the others now in chakra signatures during their earlier conversation, none surpassing Chunin rank, and thus no real threat. Even the strongest rock ninja present was likely only a specially trained jonin. Confident the risk was under control, he chose to strike. Clearing his mind, he called upon his level 5 swordsmanship and activated his 3 Magatama Sharingan, melding precision with uncanny speed. Like a wraith, he blinked in and out of sight, closing the gap before anyone could react. In a heartbeat, he slashed deep across the rock ninja jonin's torso, leaving a grievous wound that would disable him long before he could mount a defense. Chapter 142, The Great Harvest, Team Leader. As the jonin from Iwagakure reeled back, almost impaled by Nathan's blade, 2 chunin sprang forward, shouting and brandishing their weapons. They intended to overwhelm him, but Nathan was ready. With a single, unwavering look, he sent the first attacker sprawling to the ground. Before the second could steady himself, a glinting shuriken sliced through the air, tracing a graceful arc before lodging firmly in Nathan's lower abdomen. The strike drained his strength, but it was far from fatal. The 2 remaining chunin froze in shock. "Don't look at him," the wounded jonin rasped, his voice strained. Nathan only chuckled twice, the sound low and confident, then charged again. Clang! 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 Blades clashed as Nathan parried and countered, moving with lethal precision. Outnumbered 3-1, he nonetheless dominated the fight. 2 ordinary chunin and a severely wounded jonin could not find an opening against him. Each of his strikes was measured, each defense impenetrable. Against such skill and composure, his opponents faltered. Nathan pressed the attack, his blade a blur, ensuring that the only harvest this battle would yield was his absolute victory. Nathan could have ended the fight long ago, if only he'd been willing to strike true. But he'd held back, sparing vital points so his opponents might live. Now, though, it was time to finish this. He cast a sideways glance into the jungle's shadowy depths. Bandaged figures limped forward, groaning in pain. Behind them, more wounded fighters struggled to stand. Those cries had come from these hidden casualties. The Iwagakure Jonin before him, flanked by 3 Chunin bodyguards, were clearly protecting these survivors. To prevent further harm, Nathan decided to unveil his trump card. A soft chime of metal echoed as kunai and daggers clashed once more. The Jonin and Nathan circled each other in a tense dance. Then, in a flash, Nathan lifted his left hand. With a single precise motion, he formed a hand seal, one that drew the eye of even the hardened Iwagakure shinobi. Fire release, Phoenix Immortal Flame Technique, Nathan intoned. From his mouth burst dozens of glowing embers, each no larger than a seed. They hovered for an instant like fiery pollen, then streaked forward. The Jonin's eyes widened in horror. He backpedaled, raising his arms in defense, but the flames were too close. The glowing motes enveloped him, scorching his armor and singeing the trees around him. Within moments, the hidden groans fell silent. The battlefield lay still, blanketed in drifting ash, and Nathan knew the skirmish was finally over. Nathan's twin fireballs struck with surgical precision, searing flames lapping at his adversary's calves and instantly robbing him of mobility. The other 2 Iwagakure Chunin fared no better. Dozens of embers swirled under Nathan's command, hemming them into a barren stretch of forest floor. Their labored breaths filled the air. Huff! Huff! Without hesitation, Nathan spun 2 razor-sharp shuriken between his fingers and let them fly. Both embedded themselves in the men's lower abdomens, non-lethal strikes designed to cripple rather than kill. The wounded groaned, collapsing where they stood. Footsteps crunched through the underbrush, fresh reinforcements staggering toward them. Nathan wasted no time. He crossed his arms, whispered the seals for the shadow clone technique, and in an instant stood 6-fold before his opponents. 4 of you, Nathan said, nodding at the newest quartet of clones. Handle them. The clones bowed once in unison and darted into the trees. Nathan watched them go, confident in their ability to subdue the stragglers. 10 minutes later, the forest fell silent. All captives lay unconscious and bound, gathered at the clearing's edge. Nathan strode forward, pausing beside the largest of the prisoners, an Iwagakure rock ninja sprawled motionless on the ground. A triumphant smile tugged at Nathan's lips. The operation had been a flawless success. Shurano, Gotch, this is the place, Nathan murmured, his eyes sweeping over the field of bound prisoners. He began to count them at a glance, 34 captives in total, the largest haul he'd ever taken in one go. Among them were 1 Jonin, 27 Chunin, and 6 Jinin. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Based on past experience, even a severely wounded Jinin could yield about 3,000 chakra points, a Chunin between 6,000 and 10,000, and a Jonin upwards of 15,000. Although his prisoners were battered and far from their peak reserves, the sum would still be impressive. A quick mental calculation confirmed it. If he drained them all, he could harvest roughly 200,000 chakra points. Channeling that vast reservoir into his reflecting heart technique would net him about 1,250 proficiency points, and boost his Sharingan's evolution level by the same amount. With that kind of gain at his fingertips, Nathan's grin grew even wider. It was undeniably a huge breakthrough, but Nathan simply couldn't pull it off alone. The reflecting heart technique lasts exactly 1 minute per casting, and he must wait for the special chakra in his brain to dissipate before he can use it again. To reach the required 1,250 repetitions would take a full 20 hours straight, an impossibility given their circumstances. Nathan frowned. How much time did they really have? He strode over to the Iwagakure Jonin he had just fought, slapped him twice to jolt him awake, then locked eyes and activated his Sharingan. Under that genjutsu, the Jonin recalled the critical details Nathan needed, and it took no more than minutes to learn his window of opportunity. Reinforcements would arrive in 3 hours to evacuate the wounded. They had to be gone by then. In other words, Nathan had at most 3 hours to master the art of reflecting the heart. Barely enough time to consume 30,000 chakra points, let alone complete the full training. He even considered deploying shadow clones to speed things up, but quickly discovered that trick would change nothing. Nathan realized that the reflecting heart technique depends on directly stimulating the brain to generate a unique chakra flow, something only his own nervous system can accomplish. His shadow clones, though physical, lacked that critical neural feedback, so they were utterly useless for advancing his Sharingan evolution. He kicked himself for never learning a sealing jutsu, something like the yin seal, that would let him store extra chakra for prolonged training. But regrets wouldn't help now. He had to make do with what he already had. Although the clones couldn't aid him with the reflecting heart technique, they could still practice other ninjutsu. Their progress would be slower, since they didn't benefit from his proficiency panel's bonuses, and they would inevitably hit training plateaus much sooner. Yet, Nathan understood that true proficiency wasn't just about raw power boosts, it was about comprehension. Even without the panel's blessing, each clone could still experience a jutsu's mechanics firsthand and learn from its failures. His plan was simple. Let the clones grind through as many techniques as possible, take meticulous notes on every success and setback, and then distill those lessons into his own skill set. Afterward, he'd dissolve the tired clones and summon fresh ones to tackle the next batch of jutsu. By continually converting clone experiences into his personal proficiency, he could sidestep or at least soften each bottleneck. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best workaround he had discovered so far. Nathan hesitated no longer. Until now, his chakra reserves had been too meager to risk experimentation, but the current situation gave him an opening. With a single-hand seal, he summoned 4 shadow clones and assigned them tasks. 2 clones would refine their genjutsu Sharingan, another pair would practice the Rasengan, and Nathan himself would focus on mastering his reflection of the heart technique. The final clone was ordered to stand guard, eyes sweeping the horizon for any unexpected threats. He couldn't afford complacency. Although Nathan had already pried crucial intelligence from the Iwagakure Jonin commander, the battlefield shifted with every passing moment. Reinforcements, or a rescue team for the wounded, could appear at any second. Better to be ready. Satisfied that each clone had a clear role, Nathan reached down and activated the chakra absorption technique, drawing vital energy from the prostrate Iwagakure Jonin at his feet. As the stolen chakra flowed into him, he felt his strength return. With renewed power coursing through his veins, Nathan slipped seamlessly into his training, determined to sharpen every skill at his disposal. Chapter 143, Draining the Pond to Catch the Fish. 15 minutes later, both shadow clones collapsed in unison, their forms dissolving into swirling balls of chakra. Memories and experiences streamed back into Nathan's mind as the clones reintegrated with him. He paused his practice of the reflection heart technique, furrowing his brow as he sifted through the influx of data, isolating and merging the newly acquired skills. Moments later, Nathan opened his training interface. It showed that his Rasengan proficiency had climbed by 30 points. Had he trained personally, he would have gained roughly 45 points with the same amount of chakra expenditure. In other words, working through shadow clones yielded only 2/3 the efficiency of solo practice. And that was at peak performance. Over extended sessions, clone-based training would suffer diminishing returns, eventually stalling entirely unless the clones were refreshed. Nathan closed the panel with quiet resolve. He wouldn't allow efficiency to drop to 0. As long as he managed his chakra reserves and routinely rebooted his clones, he'd continue sharpening his Rasengan until it reached its limit. Nathan watched the 2 shadow clones still practicing the genjutsu, Sharingan, and made a decision. With a flick of his will, he dispelled the shadow clone technique. In an instant, the clones dissolved, and their accumulated experiences and memories flowed back into Nathan. He savored them for a moment, letting every lesson sink in. Once he'd fully absorbed their training, Nathan opened his skill panel. The genjutsu, Sharingan proficiency had jumped by 50 points, and the clones now operated at roughly 2/3 of his own efficiency. Nodding with satisfaction, he strode over to a nearby rock ninja test subject. Chanting the seals for the chakra absorption technique, he drew in the ninja's chakra and replenished his own reserves in one smooth motion. Reinvigorated, Nathan unleashed the shadow clone technique again, this time creating 4 duplicates. He set them to practice the Rasengan under his guidance while he monitored their performance. Every 15 minutes, he dispelled the clones, reclaimed their training data, absorbed more chakra with the absorption technique, and sent out a fresh quartet of shadows. He repeated this cycle relentlessly. An hour and a half later, after integrating the latest round of Rasengan practice from his clones, Nathan felt a surge of power. He reopened his skill panel and grinned. His Rasengan proficiency had leapt to level 197 out of 200 points. The training was paying off faster than he dared hope. Nathan paused his practice of the reflection heart technique, recognizing it was hitting a bottleneck, and turned his full attention back to the Rasengan. He formed the swirling chakra orb 3 times in succession. Unsurprisingly, by the third attempt, the Rasengan edged up to level 2, and with it, Nathan's comprehension of the jutsu deepened. When he summoned the technique again, both the speed of its formation and the density of the chakra sphere had noticeably improved. Still, Nathan knew he had far to go before he could combine Wind Nature Chakra with his Rasengan to develop the S-rank Wind Release Rasen Shuriken. He hadn't yet mastered the finer control required to alter a jutsu's chakra nature, so raising his Rasengan to higher levels now would only get him partway there. He reminded himself to stay patient, one step at a time. With that resolve, Nathan stabilized his breathing, formed the necessary hand seals, and activated the shadow clone technique. 4 perfect duplicates sprang into existence, each one ready to continue the same rigorous training. Minutes ticked by as Nathan and his clones rotated through forming, releasing, and analyzing their level 2 Rasengan. Before he realized it, more than an hour had slipped past. Energized by the progress he'd made, Nathan allowed himself a small, confident smile. The path ahead was long, but he'd taken another solid stride forward. With the 3-hour deadline close, in, Nathan finally reached his goal. Of his 200,000 chakra points, he had poured 28,000 into the reflection heart technique, gaining 180 proficiency points, and another 150,000 into Rasengan and Genjutsu, Sharingan, boosting them by 360 and 600 points, respectively. The remaining 20,000 had been consumed by his repeated use of the shadow clone technique. Nathan winced at the staggering loss, but time was against him. He pushed himself up and surveyed the fallen rock ninjas laid out before him. With a swift series of hand seals, he unleashed Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique. In an instant, roaring crimson flames swept over every body. The acrid stench of burnt flesh and blood filled the air. Nathan covered his nose, stepped back, and watched until the final embers died away. Satisfied that no trace remained, he turned and departed. No sooner had he gone than more than a dozen rock ninjas appeared, escorting 2 medical ninjas whose sole purpose was to tend to the wounded. Nathan crept through the charred clearing and stopped short at the sight before him. 4 motionless bodies, blackened by flame. Behind him, the Iwagakure ninja squad he'd shadowed shifted into alert formation. Some scanned the perimeter with hawk-like vigilance. Others hurriedly radioed in, desperate to relay news of the atrocity. Every face was taut with excitement. This was exactly the sort of lead they'd been hunting. But Nathan had already moved on. He'd spotted his true quarry as soon as he arrived. A separate group of 4 Chunin racing through the undergrowth, clearly desperate to deliver something. He fell in beside them, matching their pace with uncanny ease. When he was certain they were alone, he struck. In a heartbeat, he felled each shinobi with precise, non-lethal blows and slipped them into unconsciousness. Without hesitation, Nathan activated his Sharingan and wove a subtle genjutsu. It blossomed behind the eyelids of the team's leader, compelling him to reveal every detail of his assignment. Under the influence of the illusion, the Chunin confessed that they carried a sealed scroll containing critical intelligence, information meant to be passed up the chain of command at Iwagakure. Satisfied with the scope of their mission, Nathan knelt beside the dazed leader and tore open his tunic. From a hidden pouch strapped to the man's forearm, he extracted a tightly rolled parchment. Nathan studied its intricate seal marks, frowning. The arcane runes glowed faintly in the twilight, warding off any attempt to break them. No matter how skilled he was, these seals wouldn't yield. He snapped the scroll shut and tucked it safely into his own pouch. Tomorrow, He'd find someone powerful enough to unseal it. For now, the answers lay just out of reach, but at least he'd stop their delivery. Gathering his thoughts, Nathan slipped away into the shadows, already plotting his next move. The night was far from over. Nathan surveyed the scroll before him. He knew that without the precise unlocking method, the document would self-destruct the moment it was opened, and clearly the 4 captive chunin from Iwagakure held no clue to that secret. With no time to waste, he swept his gaze over the clearing, then formed the hand seals for the shadow clone technique. In an instant, a perfect double of himself stood at his side. Motioning silently, Nathan and his clone escorted the 4 prisoners into a more secluded corner of the forest. Once they were well hidden by thick undergrowth, Nathan settled himself on a fallen log and instructed his clone to stand guard. Then he turned his full attention to training. Based on his previous experiments, Nathan estimated that he could forcibly extract roughly 30,000 chakra points from these 4 chunin. With no urgent deadline, he planned to pour every last drop into mastering his reflection heart technique, a method that promised over 180 proficiency points per full drain. True, the most efficient approach would be to train entirely alone, just as he had done a few days before, sending his shadow clone off to capture new subjects while he calmly siphoned chakra over time. But today, with these 4 readily at hand, there was no reason to delay. Nathan closed his eyes, anchored his focus, and prepared to channel the stolen energies into perfecting his art. Only by proceeding this way could he fully exploit the prisoner's value without squandering time. Still, under the current circumstances, lingering in one place was far too dangerous. He'd have to shelve that plan for now. Fortunately, the Hidden Rock Village had deployed over 10,000 shinobi to encircle the 3rd Raikage and his elite Cloud Ninja. Packed together in such overwhelming numbers, even the most disciplined troops would inevitably falter, giving Nathan the opening he needed to strike his true target swiftly. Shaking his head to dispel those distractions, Nathan inhaled deeply and refocused his mind on mastering the activation sequence of the heart reflection technique. Chapter 144. 3 days later, 3 hours after the 4 Iwagakure chunin pooled their chakra into him, Nathan finally felt its energy settle in his veins. Night was falling, but he didn't pause to rest. Drawing on that fresh power, he wove the hand seals for a C-rank ninjutsu. Fire release, Great Fireball Jutsu. A colossal sphere of flame roared forth, reducing corpses to ashes and wiping every trace of battle from the clearing. Then, without hesitation, he was already moving eastward, closer to the heart of the fighting, hunting down his next opponent. Nathan's mind raced as fast as his feet. The 3rd Raikage's borrowed reserves would sustain him for only 3 days. After that, the ruler of thunder would collapse from exhaustion, and Iwagakure's forces would be free to hunt him without restraint. If Nathan remained in the land of Earth beyond that fragile window, his odds of survival would plummet. He had to grow stronger and fast, and then slip away before the sands of time ran out. Exactly 72 hours later, in the heat of the afternoon, Nathan found himself standing in a desolate stone forest on the Earth Kingdom's northwestern border. Jagged, weathered monoliths thrust up from the cracked earth, casting long shadows in the golden light. More than 20 Iwagakure rock ninjas lay sprawled at his feet, their armor cracked and bodies battered. Occasional groans of pain echoed off the stones as they struggled to rise. 4 shadow clones stood with Nathan, each a perfect replica down to the determined gleam in their eyes. Together, they surveyed the fallen shinobi, their breathing controlled, their senses alert for any hint of reinforcements. The moment of calm felt fragile, but Nathan refused to let his guard down. Time was still running out, and he still had battles yet to fight. He should have been thrilled. He'd captured dozens of Iwagakure shinobi tonight. Yet Nathan's face was as still as stone. He knew that if he didn't personally silence these prisoners, word of his raid would spread, and soon alert the entire village. Nathan's gaze settled on the lone jonin left kneeling before him. Both of the man's arms were twisted and useless, and a gruesome wound lay across his chest. But his eyes refused to show fear. "You think you've won, Uchiha brat?" The jonin snarled. "Reinforcements are on their way. You might have beaten me, but what chance do you have against all of Iwagakure?" After the bodies you've left behind, the third Tsuchikage won't let you walk away. Shut up, Nathan snapped. In the same instant, his shadow clone flickered into existence and slipped behind the Jonin. With one fluid motion, the clone struck, knocking the man's sword from his grasp and rendering him unconscious. Jonin Takagi! The onlooking Iwa shinobi cried out in alarm, rushing forward to aid their fallen comrade. Nathan didn't even have to give the order. In an instant, his 3 shadow clones sprang to life and swept through the clearing, incapacitating every Iwakure rock ninja before they could even draw their weapons. When the echoes of combat finally died away, Nathan surveyed the dozens of unconscious enemy shinobi scattered around him and realized how outnumbered he truly was. Just as the Iwa Jonin had warned him, he could take down a single opponent. But an entire squadron from Iwagakure? Not today. Not with reinforcements surely on their way to intercept him. This all had started 10 minutes earlier. Nathan had stumbled upon a hidden rendezvous point where wounded ninjas from Iwagakure were gathering. From the safety of a nearby ridge, he'd counted 1 special Jonin and 3 Chunin standing guard, and decided to strike immediately. The attack went according to plan, until a Jonin far stronger than he'd anticipated crashed into the fray. If it weren't for Nathan's lightning-quick swordsmanship, the precognition granted by his Sharingan, and a perfectly timed, unsealed Rasengan that landed squarely on the enemy Jonin's chest, he might never have walked away from that fight. But survive he did, and now, Suro, dead by prone rock ninjas, he knew the real danger had only just begun. The true Iwakure forces would arrive any moment, and Nathan had to be ready. Nathan paused, noting that he'd failed to stop the enemy's psychic beast. The pangolin had burrowed into the earth the instant it appeared, vanishing without a trace. Trapped fighting 2 Jonin, he simply couldn't maintain his transformation technique, and his true form had been laid bare. Worse still, that sneaky pangolin must have watched the whole thing before slipping away. By now, rumors of Nathan's real appearance would be spreading through Iwagakure in no time. Appearance, however, was the easy part. A transformation technique could restore the disguise. The real problem was exposure of his strength. Next time, his opponents wouldn't be Chunin scouts but special Junin, experts sent especially to deal with him. With his current skill, he might handle 1 or 2 Junin, but facing 3 at once would be dangerously close to suicide. Glancing over the latest troop movements in Yanyan village, Nathan realized they were already setting a trap. He had to verify their intentions and prepare for a far tougher battle than before. Nathan slipped through the shadows until he found an Iwa guard, one of the Chunin posted to watch the perimeter. With a few sharp slaps, he jerked the man awake, then immediately activated his Sharingan Genjutsu to pry open the guard's mind. He deliberately steered clear of the 2 Jonin. Even if traps were unlikely, Nathan refused to take chances. It was far safer to start with a less experienced shinobi. As the illusion took hold, Nathan sifted through the guard's memories. He hardly had to dig. Yanyan village hadn't bothered to encrypt this intel, or perhaps they simply didn't believe it important. Smiling at his good fortune, Nathan closed his eyes and absorbed every detail. A moment later, he opened them again, nodding to himself. Just as he'd suspected, today's operation was directed at him personally. Until now, Yanyan scouts had only noted that some mysterious assailant, or perhaps a whole team, had been preying on Iwa ninja, invariably choosing wounded targets. Now Nathan knew the full story, and he would be ready. Nathan's pursuers had tracked his trail all the way to this clearing, then laid out a series of traps, waiting for him to spring the snare. Because the last 3 days had gone so smoothly, he'd let his guard down. He'd scoped out only the 4 guards posted here and paid no mind to the scattered wounded soldiers, until it was too late. He'd walked right into their ambush. In the end, he'd been beaten decisively. Only the 3rd Raikaji still lived, and the Cloud Ninja army had not yet broken free of the Hidden Rock village's pursuit. That tie-up had prevented the village from sending in more elite shinobi. If they had, Nathan knew he never would have survived the fight. The very thought made his blood run cold. "We can't stay here a second longer," he muttered, rising to his feet. He lifted a hand, ready to unleash his shadow clones to hold off the Hidden Rock ninjas swarming the ground, and then slip away while they were occupied. But as he surveyed their numbers, dozens of men in formidable armor, bleeding and desperate, yet still very dangerous, his resolve wavered. Nathan's heart pounded. He inhaled sharply, steeling himself. It was do or die. He closed his eyes, gathered chakra, and prepared to strike. But the weight of countless enemies pressing in on him held him frozen for a heartbeat. Then, with every ounce of willpower he could muster, he burst into motion. Nathan estimated that the 20 or so hidden rock ninjas scattered around this rendezvous point carried at least 150,000 chakra between them. That wasn't an insignificant sum. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to roll the dice. He would deploy his shadow clone, practice side by side with him, and drain their chakra at maximum speed. His decision wasn't born of greed. Even if he forfeited every last drop of chakra here, his accelerated recovery would let him rebuild his reserves in about a week. Far more important was his own safety and the risk of an ambush by the Hidden Rock Village. Nathan remained because he was confident they couldn't muster enough shinobi quickly enough to threaten him at this location. In his earlier reconnaissance of the surrounding terrain, he'd seen no indication of large forces gathering nearby. Any reinforcements would have to come from much farther away, and he had no idea how long that would take. Summoning his shadow clone, Nathan began channeling advanced techniques that siphoned chakra from the unconscious hidden rock ninjas in waves. Each intake sharpened his reflexes and reinforced his mastery of the elements. The process was risky. The longer he stayed, the greater the chance enemy scouts might discover him, but the payoff was irresistible. With every pulse of stolen chakra, Nathan inched closer to his goals and cemented his reputation as a formidable shinobi. Yet even as he focused on his training, his senses remained on high alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of reinforcements making their way toward him. Furthermore, since the pangolin had already transmitted the intelligence back to Hidden Rock Village, the villagers would have to forward it up the chain of command, and that approval process would take time. With this in mind, Nathan resolved to stay behind and take his chances. Chapter 145, Pursuers. 2 hours later, Nathan dispelled his shadow clones and ended another grueling round of training. By then, every last drop of chakra had been leached from the Rock Village shinobi he'd subdued. The forest around him lay silent, just as he had anticipated. A mere 2 hours was nowhere near enough time for the enemy's reinforcements to close in. Nathan exhaled and knelt beside the 2 remaining Rock Village warriors, their chakra reserves fully depleted. He wove a series of hand seals and activated the chakra absorption technique. Within moments, his own chakra pool surged back to capacity, while the 2 enemies sank onto the forest floor, utterly drained of life force. Despite the tactical advantage he'd gained, Nathan knew he'd already revealed too much of himself in battle form. He could not afford to leave any evidence behind that might clue the rock ninjas into his true motives. With deliberate calm, Nathan formed the seals for fire style, great fireball technique. A roaring sphere of flame washed over the fallen shinobi, reducing their bodies to ash. Finally, he scoured the clearing for footprints, smudged out any chakra residue, and erased every trace of his presence. Satisfied that the scene looked as if nothing unusual had occurred, he rose and sprinted off into the southeast, heading for the next step in his mission. Nathan's route would take him across half the land of Earth, skirting its southwestern border before slipping into the land of rain, and from there, finally back into Konoha's territory. He'd received no word from the third Raikage, but Nathan suspected the Raikage wouldn't hold out much longer, certainly not past tonight. Better to be on the move now than risk wandering into the Hidden Rock Village's watchful eyes. Unbeknownst to him, scarcely minutes after he departed, a 4-man squad from the Hidden Rock Village arrived at the charred clearing. Dressed in ebony robes with their faces hidden behind masks, these shinobi were clearly Anbu. The quartet stood in silence, their gazes cold as they examined the blackened corpse at their feet. At last their leader spoke, his voice low and sharp, "Ring Yin." Without waiting for a command, Suzune of the Anbu murmured, "Understood, Captain," and swiftly formed the seal. She parted her lips just enough to release an imperceptible sound wave that radiated outward. Eyes shut, she tilted her head, attuning herself to the faintest echoes. A moment later, she opened her eyes, shook her head at the captain, and reported, "He's gone." The captain turned to the black-masked shinobi at his side. "Black?" Without a word, Black dropped to a knee and began examining the ground where Nathan had stood. Branches and scattered leaves betrayed the path Nathan had tried so hard to erase. Within seconds, the veteran tracker had discerned the subtle disturbances in the underbrush and traced them to the direction Nathan had fled. Nathan led a small squad of Ambu operatives into the heart of the stone forest. He stopped by a worn patch of dirt and crouched to point at a faint footprint pressed into the earth. "Captain, this is what our target left behind." The Ambu commander peered down at the print, tracing its outline with a gloved fingertip. "Really?" His voice was low but laced with suspicion. Nathan nodded. "Yes, see how the toes angle? He bolted off in this direction." "Excellent." The captain's eyes gleamed behind his mask. Without another word, he barked, "Move out!" In the next instant, he melted away using the instant body technique. 3 other Ambu followed suit, vanishing as silently as shadows. Not far off, Nathan's teammate, known simply as Hai, strode through a narrow corridor of towering rock spires. Suddenly, he froze, every muscle tensing. A prickling at the back of his neck warned of unseen danger. He paused, listening. The wind stirred only the leaves above, no footfalls, no voices. Still, his intuition insisted something was wrong. Half whispering to himself, Hai decided against continuing on the obvious trail. He slipped off the main path, winding through the trees on a hidden route that arced wide around the likely ambush point. Gradually, the sense of unease faded. Satisfied he had eluded whatever threat lurked ahead, Hai exhaled slowly and pressed on toward their rendezvous. Nathan barely had time to relax before that familiar prickling of dread returned barely an hour later. If he'd dismissed it as a trick of the mind the first time, he couldn't do so again. 2 identical illusions were too much to chalk up to coincidence. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan pivoted on his heel and slipped off the main path. Every step was measured as he carefully retraced and obscured his footprints. He remained in the shadows long enough to confirm the feeling had faded, until it returned, sharper than before. Now he was certain someone was tailing him, and dangerously close. Whoever it was must be formidable to send such a clear warning through his senses. His only plausible suspect, a hidden rock village ninja of considerable skill. Direct confrontation would be suicide. Nathan had no desire to mistake courage for recklessness. Once more, he altered his course, melting into the night and vanishing among the winding streets, determined to lose his pursuer rather than face him head-on. Nathan sprang into motion, his hands weaving the seals for the shadow clone technique. In an instant, a perfect duplicate of himself shimmered into being. The 2 Nathans locked eyes for a beat, then split apart and darted in opposite directions. The clone quickened its pace, deliberately luring the enemy pursuers, while the real Nathan tapped into the body flicker technique and vanished like a wisp of smoke. He had no intention of fighting or setting up an ambush. His sole goal was to put as much distance as possible between himself and the land of Earth and slip safely back into territory under Konoha's control. Every step carried him deeper into the forest, where moonlight filtered through the canopy and masked the faintest flicker of his chakra. A moment later, a silent signal filtered through his mind, his clone's report. The 3rd Raikage was dead, cut down in battle. With their leader gone, the hidden stone village would flood the region with reinforcements. Even if most shinobi remained at the front, a small task force would be more than enough to track him down and finish the job. Nathan's pulse quickened. He couldn't afford delay or entanglement with Rock Village operatives. Summoning every ounce of speed, he vanished again in a blur of movement, leaving only rustling leaves and a single, taunting shadow behind. His path lay clear. One last sprint to the ridge, then across the border into Konoha's safe haven, far from the hunt now closing in. Nathan's footsteps quickened as he silently resolved his next move. Fortunately, he had perfected the instant body technique early in his training. Now, each use felt like flight, carrying him swiftly over the forest floor. Coupled with a chakra reserve far beyond that of an ordinary shinobi, Nathan had little doubt he could outrun any pursuers. Still, he refused to ignore the threat behind him. In battle, the proverb holds true. Know both yourself and your enemy, and you need never fear defeat. Even if he had no intention of engaging those on his tail, gathering information about them remained essential. He summoned his shadow clone, tasking it with the reconnaissance. Nathan imbued the clone with 10,000 chakra points, more than enough to withstand most assaults, provided it avoided direct confrontations. And thanks to the Sharingan's heightened perception, evading incoming attacks was effortless. With the clone's superior survivability and Nathan's keen insight, discovering the enemy's identity and numbers would be a simple matter. Once he had the intel he needed, he could decide whether to fight, flee, or set a trap of his own. Chapter 146, Confrontation in the Forest. An hour later, deep within the forest, Nathan's shadow clone raced along the narrow trails between ancient trees. A whisper of air, then suddenly several kunai sliced toward him. The clone spun, his movements fluid, and the blades all but vaporized as he deflected them with a flick of his arm. Landing lightly on a low branch, he scanned the dim undergrowth with a wary gaze. Swish! In an instant, two figures dropped from the canopy above. Both wore black Ambu robes and masks. One was the captain of Iwagakure's elite unit, the other a female shinobi known only as Suzune. "Iwagakure Ambu?" the clone asked, his voice a calm monotone. Neither answered. The captain stepped forward, his presence radiating authority. After a measured pause, he spoke. "Uchiha Nathan," he said, voice low and steady, "you're the new prodigy of the Uchiha clan. You awakened the 3 Tomoe Sharingan at age 11. Tell us, what brings you here?" Nathan's heart skipped. The 5 great nations' intelligence networks were truly formidable to unmask him so quickly. He forced a neutral expression, mindful that despite his rising reputation, in Konoha he was still regarded as no more than an up-and-coming shinobi. He studied the masked captain and Suzune, searching for any hint of their true intent. Then, raising his head, he issued his reply. "My purpose is my own. If you want answers, come and take them." Tension rippled through the forest air. Branches trembled, leaves quivered. Neither side made a move yet, but both were ready. The clash between a newly crowned Uchiha prodigy and Iwagakure's most secretive operatives was about to begin. Nathan's deliberate effort to stay under the radar had its limits. After all, Konoha teemed with prodigies, against the likes of young Hatake Kakashi or the recently renowned Uchiha Shisui on the front lines. Nathan's name barely registered. Yet in less than a few hours, the Hidden Rock village had unmasked him and even managed to gather basic intelligence, a stark reminder of how fiercely the 5 great nations' spy networks vied for information. All at once, Nathan's vigilance snapped to full alert. Thoughts raced through his mind as he snapped open his Sharingan. The 2 Ambu shinobi, taken aback by the sudden crimson swirl in his eyes, instinctively broke their gaze. Seizing the moment, Nathan spun his palm and 6 razor-edged shuriken materialized above his hand. With a flick of his wrist, they darted out from both sides, arcing straight toward Lingyan. In Nathan's ruthless calculus, it was always better to disable a single finger than risk losing 10, so he aimed with surgical precision at the weaker opponent. Sensing the threat, Lingyan leapt aside and retreated, hoping to evade the incoming shuriken. But Nathan had already predicted her move. With a flick of his wrist, 2 more blades shot out, this time with even greater force. Though he released them after the first 6, they streaked ahead, slicing through 2 mid-air shuriken with uncanny precision. Sparks flew as the deflected blades careened into the remaining 4, transforming them into 8 deadly projectiles arcing toward Lingyan like steel petals. Her feet barely touched the ground when the shuriken descended, leaving her no time to dodge. Instinctively, she drew her twin kunai and met the attack head-on. Thanks to her Anbu training, she managed to parry all 8 blades, each strike ringing through the air. She wasn't unharmed. 2 shuriken glanced off her kunai and scored shallow slashes across her shoulders. At that moment, Nathan could have pressed the assault, widened the gap, ended the fight, but he didn't. Not because he lacked the will, but because he physically couldn't. Nathan moved, and the Ambu captain did the same. Whoosh! 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 A volley of kunai sliced through the air toward him. Instantly, Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. He spotted the detonator tag fastened to his back. Without hesitation, he flung a shuriken and vanished from his original position. Boom! 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 A chain of explosions rocked the clearing. fiery blasts driving back the darkness. As Nathan touched down, the Ambu captain and Suzune descended on him from opposite sides, cutting off any escape. They'd come prepared to counter the Sharingan. "Do it," the captain ordered. At his command, Suzune flashed a swift hand seal and unleashed a piercing shriek. The sound hammered into Nathan's mind, shattering his concentration. Seizing the moment, the Ambu captain lunged forward, plunging a kunai straight for Nathan's heart. Thanks to the Sharingan, every detail of the captain's attack crawled in slow motion before Nathan's eyes, giving him the precious split second he needed to brace for the strike. Nathan bit back the throbbing in his skull and twisted out of the Ambu captain's strike just in time. No sooner had he cleared the blade than a kunai whistled toward Suzune, yanking her out of her ninjutsu. Nathan lunged forward to protect her, but the captain was already on him, his second attack binding Nathan's arms and halting his advance. All around them, the clearing echoed with metallic dings and dongs, the sound rebounding off every tree and rock. This Anbu captain was the epitome of a seasoned jonin. Even blindfolded by his own sound barrier, he effortlessly maintained the rhythm of Nathan's thrusts and parries. Meanwhile, Lingyan, Nathan's unseen assistant, unleashed wave after wave of sound-based ninjutsu. Each pulse unsettled Nathan's footing and frayed his concentration. Nathan tried to mount a counterattack, but he never found an opening. If he reached out with his chakra-infused fist, the captain would block or redirect it. If he darted in close, Ling Yin's sonic waves forced him to step back. Every move he made was anticipated and neutralized. Frustration coiled in his gut. He felt the fight slipping from his control, as if he were being puppeteered by these two masters. That was when it hit him. He wasn't even his real self. He was nothing more than a shadow clone, fragile, expendable, tightly restricted by the very jutsu that sustained him. No wonder they'd been able to stifle him so thoroughly. And with that realization came a surge of clarity. If he was just an echo, his true self was safe, and somewhere out of sight, gathering strength for the real counterstrike. Even though the Hidden Rock Village handpicked these two specifically to take him down, Nathan found himself unnervingly on the defensive. The real culprit, he realized, wasn't their skill so much as the inherent fragility of his shadow clones, which kept him from unleashing his full strength. The battle raged on, and with every exchange, Nathan learned more about his opponents. First, there was Suzune, a special jonin whose physical prowess barely registered above average. Her true specialty lay in a series of sound-wave ninjutsu. Earlier, her lack of finesse had left Nathan's clone vulnerable, but he was confident that next time he'd be ready. A little forewarning, and his real body would shrug off her sonic assault without so much as a flinch. His other adversary was the Ambu captain standing before him, a warrior whose raw swordsmanship exceeded even the level 5 ranking. To keep this foe in check, Nathan knew he'd have to rely on the predictive edge of his Sharingan. With that insight, he just might turn the tide of the fight. Nathan noted another troubling fact. This Iwagakure Ambu was a master of a defensive earth-release escape technique. He could activate it the instant he was struck, hardening his skin until even a sword couldn't pierce it. Without fully mastering the transformations of wind nature chakra, and without infusing his short sword with wind-release chakra to amplify its cutting power, Nathan stood little chance of breaking through that defense. Ideally, Nathan could rely on his Sharingan. In theory, he might momentarily blind his opponent, spot an opening, and finish him with a single decisive blow. But putting that plan into practice would be anything but easy. Clearly, this Anbu's skill surpassed that of an ordinary jonin. Whether he enked among the true elite, Nathan couldn't say. He'd never faced, and thus had no benchmark for, ninja of this caliber. Nor could he be certain the Anbu wasn't holding something back. After all, by the time a shinobi reaches jonin rank, he's typically proficient in at least 2 chakra natures. Nathan had to prepare for the possibility that his opponent still had hidden strengths. Nathan studied the Iwagakure Anbu standing before him. Aside from a single Earth Escape ninjutsu, the masked shinobi hadn't unleashed any other technique. That cautious restraint left Nathan with no clear measure of his opponent's true power. Chapter 147, Surveillance Clang! Nathan's kunai met the Anbu captain's dagger in a sharp collision. Sparks flew as they struck again, and the captain, his face shadowed beneath the mask, took a step back, then another, steadily increasing the distance between them. Suzune, puzzled by her ally's sudden retreat, froze mid-attack and watched Nathan warily. Nathan lowered his blade and met the captain's darkened gaze without flinching. He instantly recognized the change in the man's posture. His disguise had been seen through. Rather than tense up, Nathan let a relaxed smile play across his features. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Feel free to press the attack." The captain's response was deceptively calm. "As I thought," he said, voice steady. "You're not Uchiha Seimei. You must be one of his shadow clones." "A shadow clone?" Suzune echoed, stepping forward. Her eyes widened in surprise, though she showed no sign of alarm. Clearly, both she and the Ambu captain had prepared for this exact outcome. Nathan sheathed his kunai and shrugged. "Clone or not, here I stand," he replied. His casual confidence only deepened the frown beneath the Anbu mask, yet he seemed as unfazed by discovery as if nothing at all had changed. Nathan could tell at a glance that the Anbu captain before him wasn't fooled by appearances. Shadow clones couldn't sustain serious damage, so they instinctively avoided risky moves, even when an opportunity for a decisive strike presented itself. A single hesitation might be chalked up to caution, but repeated reluctance? No shinobi would pass up attack after attack if they were the real deal. Nathan was certain the captain had deduced his ruse from those very odd hesitations. What surprised Nathan most, however, was how unfazed the captain seemed, as if he'd expected it all along. "You don't mean," Nathan began, his heart pounding. The captain stood motionless under the jungle canopy, blade sheathed, his masked face betrayed nothing. Nathan's gaze flicked from the two other Ambu Apu operatives flanking him to the dense foliage all around. "No way," he muttered. "Is the plan about to change again?" the captain asked, tone flat but alert. Nathan opened his mouth, but no answer came. Before he could gather his thoughts, a subtle pressure wave rippled through the air, unseen but unmistakable. It hit him like a physical blow, sending a shiver through his body. He staggered, realization dawning that this mission was spiraling far beyond anything he'd anticipated. Nathan looked up just in time to see the kunoichi, who had been acting as support, unleash a massive offensive ninjutsu. An imperceptible shockwave pulsed out from her in widening concentric circles. Flowers and vines trembled, trees quivered, even snakes, insects, rats, and ants shook as the wave passed. And with every passing moment, the vibrations only grew stronger. Inside its radius, Nathan felt the very fibers of his body vibrate wildly, as though he might shatter from the resonance. If that truly was resonance in action, then the technique's destructive potential was terrifying. But it no longer mattered to him. The enemy had deliberately targeted his shadow clones, knowing full well their limited durability, and if they'd remained in range for another heartbeat, the outcome would have been fatal. Nathan stopped expending chakra. With a calm, precise gesture, he dispelled the remaining shadow clones and stepped beyond the ninjutsu's reach. Suzune watched in relief as Nathan's chakra coalesced into a glowing sphere and then vanished. Only then did she release her hand seals and stagger back on one knee, gasping for breath. Such a powerful ninjutsu always took a heavy toll on her stamina. After a moment's rest, she straightened, wiped sweat from her brow, and reported to the Ambu captain beside her. "Captain, I'm ready. Let's go." He gave a curt nod. "Right." Together, they retraced their path through the forest, determined to catch up with the two shinobi ahead of them. Unbeknownst to those two, they were running along the very trail Nathan's true body had used to slip away. The Iwagakure Ambu had never actually lost sight of Nathan. They'd simply split their squad into two pursuit teams down parallel routes. That was why the captain and Suzune had reacted so calmly when they realized the pair before them were nothing more than a shadow clone. Elsewhere in the forest, Nathan dashed through the undergrowth, every sense on high alert. Abruptly, he came to a halt, heart pounding. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, and was met by a sudden influx of memory. His features darkened as the realization struck him like a blade. Nathan could almost read the shadow clone's thoughts, and the unnerving calm with which the two opponents had responded only deepened his suspicions. Their pressure on the clone, combined with the fact that one was an Ambu captain and the other a special jonin skilled in sonic ninjutsu, told him this fight might involve more than just the two of them. His instincts, which had screamed a warning moments ago, weren't wrong. There was a strong chance additional enemies were lurking behind him. He skidded to a halt and whipped around. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5, 10. A full minute slipped by, and the path behind him lay empty and silent. Nathan exhaled in relief, the tension draining from his shoulders. He faced forward and let out a self-deprecating chuckle. When did I turn into such a scared bird? As the adrenaline ebbed, he ran through the numbers in his head. Even if someone was trailing him at that very moment, they couldn't hope to close the gap at the pace he'd been moving. Nathan tightened his grip on his weapon, squared his shoulders, and pressed on, ready for whatever lay ahead. Nathan's legs churned beneath him like pistons, propelling him forward with such ferocity that any ordinary pursuers would have struggled just to keep him in sight. He was about to redouble his pace when a sudden chill ran down his spine. Instinctively, he glanced skyward and froze. Moonlight glinted off a solitary eagle circling high above, its silhouette unmoving, its gaze fixed on the ground below like some silent sentry. Without the Sharingan's enhanced vision, Nathan might never have spotted the bird. To any casual observer, it was just another raptor riding a thermal current under the full moon. But Nathan's instincts screamed otherwise. This eagle was no random predator. It was a live feed for the hunters tailing him. Against ordinary trackers, his speed was enough. He could vanish down any alley or blur past any checkpoint before they could react. But with this winged spy tracing his every move, his escape routes were laid bare, primed for ambush and encirclement. Fighting on enemy turf was always dangerous, but this took the risk to another level. As long as the eagle remained overhead, Nathan's advantage evaporated. He couldn't outpace information. He had to think fast and find a way to ground his watcher before the net closed in completely. No, I need to shake this thing off, or it'll trap me sooner or later. Nathan's mind raced as he gauged the distance between himself and the eagle circling high above. His dojutsu couldn't reach that far, and any other ninjutsu was similarly out of the question. If he couldn't strike the bird directly, he'd have to go after the one pulling its strings. He let out a frustrated sigh. He'd planned to slip past the Hidden Rock operatives without a fight, but plans never survive first contact. Avoiding a battle now was impossible. Still, all wasn't lost. His shadow clone had already lured part of the enemy force down a different route. They wouldn't be able to regroup for some time. If he moved fast enough, he should be able to prevent himself from being completely surrounded. Steeling himself, Nathan pressed forward, determined to find and confront the eagle's controller before it was too late. Chapter 148, The Final Battle. Nathan made his decision without hesitation. He dropped into his original posture and exploded forward at top speed. Sure enough, the great eagle swooped in pursuit, its deafening wings churning the air behind him. Ignoring its cries, Nathan raced on until he reached the stand of ancient trees. He paused just beyond the trail, where the thick canopy overhead blotted out any chance of being spotted from above. Drawing in a steady breath, he crossed his arms and invoked the shadow clone technique. In a shimmer of dark energy, an identical Nathan stood at his side. With a curt nod, Nathan sent the clone hurtling down the forest path, its footsteps muffled by the dense undergrowth. The real Nathan slipped into the shadows beside a massive oak, pressed flat against its gnarled roots, every muscle tensed and every breath silent. Time stretched on. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Doubt flickered through Nathan's mind. Had he misread the enemy's tactics? Yet he held himself perfectly still, determination sharpening his focus. At last, the soft crunch of leaf litter heralded their approach. Two figures materialized on the winding trail ahead, their armor catching stray beams of sunlight. Nathan's pulse steadied. The final battle was upon him. Nathan's eyes narrowed as two figures stepped out of the gloom, their black robes and masks identical to the Anbu he'd spotted earlier. Clearly, they were also members of the Hidden Stone Village's covert unit. A rush of relief swept through him. There's a saying in the Shinobi world, you don't fear the hand that strikes, you dread the shadow you never see. Now that his pursuers were in plain sight, he could finally fight back. Seizing the moment, Nathan whipped 3 kunai from his belt and hurled them in rapid succession at the closer Anbu operative. True to form, the masked ninja spun aside, evading the blades at the last instant. But Nathan's kunai were far from ordinary. Each had a detonating seal affixed to its tail. Boom, boom, boom. 3 thunderous explosions ripped through the cavern, each blast sending arcs of crackling flame racing outward. In an instant, the firelight washed away the darkness, revealing every jagged wall and shadowed alcove. The battlefield was illuminated, and Nathan was ready. Nathan's Sharingan spun in his eyes, instantly locking onto the positions of the 2 Iwagakure Anbu operatives. Without a moment's hesitation, he flipped open his palm and sent 3 shuriken flying toward the one who'd staggered under the shockwave of the detonating talisman. The target was still dazed, unable to react in time. He managed to deflect 2 blades, but the third threw him off balance. He twisted away at the last second, but not far enough. The steel cut across his side, leaving a deep, bloody gash on his waist. Before the wounded shinobi could recover, Nathan's hands wove a rapid series of seals. He opened his mouth and unleashed a torrent of tiny scorching fireballs, like a swarm of glowing impatience seeds. The technique flared to life around him. Fire style. Impatience fire technique. Harnessing the fireballs, Nathan surged forward, every step carrying him closer to his staggered foe. Water style. Water array wall. The Iwagakure Anbu shouted, plunging both hands into a sealing gesture. A semi-transparent barrier of churning water materialized in front of him, colliding with Nathan's fiery onslaught in a hiss of steam. Nathan watched the exchange unfold with a twinge of regret. He'd missed his opening. A second Iwagakure Anbu operative had already locked him in their sights and was charging headlong toward him. Before the enemy even arrived, a volley of kunai whistled through the air. Clang! In a flash, Nathan drew the short sword from his hip. The blade rang out as it met each missile in turn. Ding, ding, ding. Sparks flew, and every kunai shattered harmlessly against his steel. He held his stance, waiting for the pursuer to close the distance, when abruptly, the shinobi skidded to a halt and melted behind a thick-trunked oa. Nathan's brow went up. He'd been right to hold back. That sudden knife assault hadn't been a genuine attempt to kill him. It had been a well-timed feint, intended to draw his focus and relieve the pressure on the rest of the Anbu team. Anyone still in their right mind would think twice before engaging a Sharingan user in one-on-one combat, especially someone with Nathan's fearsome reputation as a swordsman. He knew, too, that the pangolin informant had already passed word of his blade skills back to headquarters. There was simply no reason for this shinobi to risk close-quarters combat, unless he was an Anbu captain with enough confidence or foolhardiness to challenge Nathan despite all odds. Nathan doubted his foe was quite that brave. He stepped forward, prepared for whatever surprise move might come next. Nathan's gaze shifted to the other Iwagakure Anbu, but the shinobi had already slipped into hiding. All around him, the forest lay eerily still. Apart from the crackle of trees burning in the distance, there was nothing but silence. Minutes ticked by, yet neither of the 2 Anbu made a move. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he pieced it together. They didn't dare face him head-on. Their only hope was to stall until reinforcements arrived, to drag him into a trap from which there would be no escape. A cold laugh escaped him. Without warning, Nathan drove his short sword deep into the earth, planted his feet firmly, and flew through a series of hand seals. He drew in a lungful of air, then unleashed it in a thunderous exhalation. Instantly, a vortex of razor-sharp wind roared to life behind him and charged forward, ripping saplings from their roots, shredding underbrush, and hurling gravel through the air. The forest itself seemed to tremble before the onslaught. This was his full-power wind release. Great breakthrough, a single technique that cost him nearly 1,000 chakra points. The moonlight flooded the clearing now that the trees were gone, casting everything in a pale, ethereal glow. From the shadows emerged 2 Iwagakure Anbu agents. They spread out, forming a triangle around Nathan, ready to spring their ambush the moment his Sharingan activated. But stripped of his usual cover, Nathan didn't hesitate. He thrived in open space, even outnumbered. Die! He snarled, drawing his blade in one fluid motion and lunging toward the nearer target. He'd wounded this enemy in a prior skirmish and had no intention of letting him escape now. While one agent reeled, Nathan shifted his focus to the second Ambu, keeping both within striking range. Steel rang on steel as the three combatants collided. Nathan noted with quiet satisfaction that these two were noticeably less skilled than the pair his shadow clone had faced earlier. Even so, he stayed alert. No opponent could be underestimated. With precise footwork, he weaved between them, ready to finish what he'd started. Perhaps it was because the two adversaries excelled at support techniques rather than direct confrontation, but in under 12 minutes, Nathan had cut them down. They launched several desperate counterattacks, yet his level 5 swordsmanship, combined with the power of his 3 Magatama Sharingan, rendered every strike ineffective. Determined to finish the fight swiftly, Nathan exchanged blows more aggressively than usual, sustaining a few superficial wounds. Fortunately, his healing skill made quick work of those injuries. Once he'd patched himself up, he didn't linger to tidy the battlefield. He simply turned and walked away. Chapter 149 Return. An hour and a half later, the Anbu captain and his teammate Suzune arrived at the scene. What greeted them was utter chaos: overturned carts, shattered crates, the ground slick with blood, and the bodies of their two fallen comrades. A chill ran through them. The calm professionalism they'd carried on the mission was gone. "Captain?" Suzune's voice hitched as he surveyed the destruction. The captain cut him off gently. "First things first. Let's search for any trace of our target." "Understood." They spread out, methodically combing the wreckage. For a long moment, they worked in silence, kneeling, scanning, marking footprints, gathering scraps of torn fabric. When they reconvened, both men's eyes betrayed their frustration. "We've got him," the captain said quietly. Suzune frowned. "Then why do we feel like we're nowhere?" "There's too much." The captain shook his head under his mask. "Hundreds of prints, every bit of debris a possible clue. We've never seen anything like it." Suzune ran a hand over his brow. "Our tracking specialists," he began, then stopped. The two best scouts on the team lay dead within steps of each other. Without them, piecing this together will take ages. We'll lose him. "Let's not give up hope." The captain straightened. "We'll split the leads, start narrowing by distance and timing. It won't be fast, but it's all we can do." Suzune nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Together, they bent back to the task, determined to untangle the web of traces Nathan had left behind, and to bring their target to justice before he slipped away for good. By the time they realize where he's headed, Nathan will almost certainly be long gone. The Ambu captain knows the odds of catching him now are slim, perhaps 1 in 10,000, but he refuses to give up. "Lingyan," he orders, his voice low but firm, "alert the forward teams. Seal every route leading to the Rain Country border immediately." Nathan's suspicions had paid off. Before the Hidden Rock village could close in, he'd spotted the Ambu's surveillance hawk circling overhead. If he'd missed that telltale sign, he would have blundered right into their ambush. With his cover blown, he had no choice but to fall back. Worse still, his Sharingan hasn't reached its full potential yet. There's no way it can evolve into the Manjikyo in time. His most powerful asset is gone for now. All he can do is keep moving and hope the path to freedom remains open. If he'd been caught in that net, there'd have been no way out, only a gruesome death. He could only acknowledge that his own caution had saved him once again. 3 days later, at the southern border of the Land of Earth, Nathan crept past the last defensive outpost of the Hidden Rock village and finally stepped into the Land of Rain. Another full day's careful travel through patrol territory, and he reached the edge of Konoha's domain. Only then did the constant threat fade away. He let himself pause and look back over the jagged ridges and valley passes he'd crossed. Every road had been sealed by Hidden Rock's forces, and trackers combed the wilderness for him. To stay alive, he'd abandoned every well-worn path, sleeping only in hidden mountain caves and moving whenever the wind changed. The journey had nearly turned him feral. Each sunrise found him tired, hungry, and bruised. Now, with Konoha's banners fluttering ahead, all Nathan could think about was finding a bath deep enough to wash away the grime and dirt clinging to him, and a warm bed where he could finally sleep without worrying about pursuers. "Who is it?" Nathan called out, eyes narrowing against the gathering dusk. A surprisingly youthful voice answered from the shadows. Then several kunai streaked through the air, grazing his cheek before thudding into the massive tree trunk ahead. Instantly, Nathan halted and activated his 3 Magatama Sharingan, scanning for the assailant's position. To his astonishment, he met another set of 3 Magatama Sharingan, staring back at him. Stepping into the faint moonlight was a young Uchiha, slightly smaller in stature than Nathan. "Shisui?" he whispered. Behind Shisui, 3 Konoha Chunin stood in formation, clearly the rest of his team. But Nathan's attention remained fixed on Shisui alone. Months of battles had transformed his comrade. Although Shisui's face still looked boyish, his bearing was remarkably steady, radiating calm confidence. Shisui regarded Nathan with slow, deliberate scrutiny, as if sizing up an old friend turned rival. At last, recognition flickered in his Sharingan. "Nathan?" he exclaimed, stepping forward. Nathan arrived at the rendezvous point looking nothing like himself. Mud caked his clothes, his hair hung in greasy strands, and his posture was as wild as a stray animal's. Uchiha Shisui blinked in disbelief. He had trained alongside Nathan for years, always precise, always sharp. This battered figure before him seemed a stranger. Nathan met his astonished gaze and offered a crooked grin. "It's me." At once, Shisui held up a hand, signaling the 3 figures behind him to lower their weapons. He stepped forward, relief softening his features. "Nathan, what happened to you?" Nathan wiped a smear of grime across his brow and nodded toward the north. "The mission. It left me no choice." Shisui fell silent. He'd learned better than to press after a mission report like that. A few more words passed between them as Shisui confirmed his comrade's identity, and then he let Nathan slip away into the shadows. As Nathan disappeared, Shisui's eyes narrowed. When their Sharingan met, Shisui had sensed something strange, an odd restraint, as if Nathan's own ocular power had been stifled. If his Sharingan had to be suppressed just to mask its strength, then Nathan's potential must now eclipse his own. And at the pace Nathan was advancing, the future looked unpredictable indeed. Nathan sat in quiet reflection, his Sharingan eyes tracing the swirling crimson tome of his 3 Magatama form. Among all the Uchiha Jonin, Shisui stood apart, an unparalleled talent whose skill and insight were legendary. Yet Nathan couldn't shake the urge to compare. After all, since he'd unlocked his own 3 Magatama Sharingan, his pupil power had already overtaken Shisui's. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. He reviewed the data in his mind, running Shisui's progression through the same panel rules he used for himself. The result left him both impressed and humbled. Shisui's evolution trailed his own by only 1,000 or 2 points. Nathan exhaled sharply. He'd relied on every shortcut and advantage available, a stark contrast to Shisui, who'd achieved his mastery through sheer dedication and effort. The fact that the Jonin's natural talent kept pace so closely spoke volumes about Shisui's innate gifts. Moments later, Nathan's competitive spark faded. Talent, he realized, was neither his burden nor his goal. All that mattered was forging his own path, one step at a time, without obsessing over whose Sharingan burned brighter. Even the most naturally gifted shinobi hit a wall once they reached the Mangekyo Sharingan threshold. Nathan, however, is in a different league. If he chose to push it, he could awaken his Mangekyo Sharingan in as little as 2 weeks. But to what end? Aside from raising the risk of hereditary eye disorders, it wouldn't significantly boost his combat power, especially since now is hardly the time to flaunt such an ability. What Nathan really needs is to strengthen his physique attribute and bring it up to the level of his spiritual attribute. Only by shoring up his physical foundation first can he prepare himself for the true breakthroughs that lie ahead. Chapter 150. Rest and Planning. A full day passed before Nathan finally arrived back at the base camp, having cleared checkpoint after checkpoint. He could have filed his mission report immediately, but the stench of 10 days on the road left him desperate for a proper wash. Camp facilities were scarce, so he headed straight for the waterfall just beyond the training grounds. Under the tumbling water, he let the cold spray rinse away grit and sweat. Emerging refreshed in a clean uniform, he set himself down to record every detail of the operation. With his shadow clone handling the tedious parts and effectively on duty around the clock, the report was finished surprisingly quickly. Nathan uploaded it without a second thought for his superior's opinions. then slipped back to his quarters. He had gone nearly 10 days without more than fitful naps. Now, with his work done, he collapsed onto the cot and surrendered to a long, dreamless sleep. When he came to, sunlight streamed through the narrow window, and the clock read well past noon. Nathan bolted upright, the muscles in his back tensing as his Sharingan flared open. Instinctively, he scanned the walls and doorframe, every sense alert for the slightest disturbance. Fully awake now, he forced himself to settle. Today, he would rest, but tomorrow, he had plans to make. Nathan took in the modest furnishings of the tent and suddenly realized he was back at the base camp. He let out a long, relieved breath. With a soft thud, he collapsed onto his sleeping mat and shut his eyes. 1 second passed, 2 seconds, 3, a minute, 2 minutes, 3. 10 minutes slipped by, and though his body felt exhausted, sleep simply wouldn't come. Giving up on rest, Nathan pushed himself up on his elbows and sat upright. Panel. At the word, the familiar pale blue interface flickered to life before him. Nathan settled into the dim glow of the training room, his Sharingan eye momentarily fading as he opened his status window. The translucent panel hovered before him, laying out every detail of his progress. Name, Uchiha Nathan. Physique, 11. Spirit, 15. Chakra reserves, 21,350. Previously, 20,980. Bloodline, Sharingan, 3 Magatama. 8,724. 10,000 skills. Chakra refining technique, 4. 1,738, 2,000. Fire style, Great Fireball technique, of 4. 65, 2,000. Fire style, Dragon Fire technique, 4. 23, 2,000. Wind style, Great Breakthrough, 3. 419, 1,000. Shadow clone technique, 2. 88, 500. Chakra absorption technique, Lfma 5. 1,050, 5,000. Healing technique, Sik 4. 652,000. Rasengan, Vol 3, 651,000. Illusion, Sharingan, 6, 2,310, 10,000. Reflection of the Heart, 7, 3,610, 20,000. Swordsmanship, Level 5, 1,120, 5,000. Chakra Control, the 4, 820, 2,000. 3 Body Technique, 3. Blinking Body Technique, Level 4. Ninja Tool Throwing, 5. Fire Style, Phoenix Fire Technique. Magic, Shackle Technique. Nathan's gaze fixed on the 3 Magatama orbiting his Sharingan. With their evolution gauge at 8,724 out of 10,000, he silently calculated the effort required to push them past their next threshold. Roughly 200,000 chakra points, no small feat for an 11-year-old shinobi, but a challenge Nathan was determined to meet. Nathan stared at the readout. His chakra now regenerates at 21,000 points per day. At that rate, he'd be back to full strength in under 10 days. He weighed his options and resolved to spend the next stretch doing nothing but train the reflection heart technique, his goal to push his Sharingan's evolution level beyond 9,900 points. Not long ago, Shinobi from the Hidden Rock village had surrounded him and triggered a ceiling formation. He'd slipped away by the skin of his teeth, but the close call made one thing clear. He needed a trump card. The Mangekyo Sharingan was exactly the game-changer that could turn a dire situation on its head. To force open that ultimate form, Nathan had to drive his Sharingan to the very brink of advancement and do it fast. Only then could he call upon the Mangekyo's power at a critical moment and sway the course of the war. Yet he knew the price. Every boost in his spiritual, ocular prowess would deepen the imbalance with his physical strength, exponentially increasing the risk of the hereditary degeneration that haunted his clan. Nathan realized that the moment his Sharingan neared its next evolution, he had to devote himself to strengthening his body, or risk collapsing once that surge of power faded. His plan was exactly as he'd outlined. Use high-level medical ninjutsu to produce Yangtun chakra, let its warming energy circulate through his muscles and bones, and naturally build up his physique. It was by far the easiest route available and the one with the fewest side effects. Still, Nathan couldn't focus on medical ninjutsu alone. He needed to split his time between wind style, great breakthrough, mastering the Rasengan, sharpening his Sharingan-powered genjutsu, and refining his swordsmanship. Juggling all those disciplines made his temples throb. To make matters worse, he might have to return to his old duty, capturing prisoners to serve as chakra batteries. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. It would sure help if I could get my hands on a tailed beast, he murmured. But that was only a daydream. Without the Mangekyo Sharingan, he wouldn't dare confront a tailed beast, and even after awakening it, he'd never launch an attack without absolute certainty of success. In the Shinobi world, every power, especially the 5 great nations, has its sights set on the tailed beasts. Nathan understands their schemes, so he isn't overly worried about standard rivals. No, his real concerns are Uchiha Madara and Black Zetsu. Madara's threat, Nathan figures, is fleeting. Sooner or later, Madara's life will run its course, and Nathan can forget about him. Black Zetsu, however, is a different story. As the living embodiment of Kaguya Otsutsuki's will, Black Zetsu has spent a millennium weaving plots across the ninja world to restore his mother. Now that his plans are reaching fruition, he will stop at nothing to seize all 9 tailed beasts for himself. If Nathan ever attempts to extract a tailed beast, a confrontation with Black Zetsu is unavoidable. But Black Zetsu's unparalleled stealth and all-pervasive sensory abilities make him exceptionally hard to outmaneuver. Before Nathan makes his move, he knows he must develop a detection system powerful enough to neutralize Zetsu's surveillance. Otherwise, the moment he captures a beast, someone far more cunning will steal it from right under his nose. Nathan didn't want to become a pawn in someone else's game. He had to be ready for anything. After all, when Nagato took over the Akatsuki, their true mission was to seize the tailed beasts, and that outcome simply couldn't be allowed. The more Nathan thought about his current abilities, the more he realized he wasn't prepared. He needed something beyond ordinary jutsu. If he could master the Flying Thunder God technique, he'd gain instant, battlefield-shattering mobility, and perhaps even the edge that would save his life. Flying Thunder God technique, he murmured, tasting the words on his tongue. But Nathan knew this technique wasn't open to just anyone. Yes, shinobi like Shiranui Genji, Daiwashi, and Bingzu Leitong had learned it, but only because they served as the 4th Hokage's personal bodyguards. Minato Namikaze's special favor had granted them access to this S-rank forbidden jutsu, meticulously recorded in the Scroll of Seals. For the rest of the world, the Flying Thunder God technique remained sealed, locked away for those Minato himself chose. If Nathan hoped to claim it, he would have to break through every barrier standing between him and that legendary power. Nathan knew that as long as Sarutobi Hiruzen remained Hokage, no matter how many contributions he made, he'd never be allowed to learn this technique. Hiruzen's deep-seated fear of the Uchiha was well known. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tolerated Shimura Danzo's unchecked rise to power. Why would they entrust a student with a ninjutsu that granted unparalleled mobility, only to risk assassination at his hand? Thinking of Hiruzen and Danzo set Nathan's blood boiling. He imagined striking them both down in a single stroke. But he forced himself to calm down. He wasn't strong enough to pull off an assassination, and even if he were, such a move before the war's end would doom him. At this point, he still needed shelter and the protection that only Konoha could provide. More than that, Nathan refused to see the village hidden in the leaves defeated in this great ninja war. Whatever his grievances, Konoha's fall would be no victory for him. Chapter 151, Thoughts. 3 days later, just after dawn, Nathan stood on the northwest edge of the camp's training grounds, his short sword flashing in the pale morning light. He ran through the same sword form, 1, 2, 3 precise cuts, over and over, each movement crisp and controlled. Every few passes, he would pause, sheath his blade, and close his eyes, replaying each motion in his mind. Since arriving here, Nathan had devoted himself almost exclusively to the art of reflecting the heart. But his daily chakra reserves were finite, and spending more than 2 hours in intense refinement risked total exhaustion. Rather than let idle time slip away, he reserved a small portion of chakra to hone his swordsmanship, an art that demanded little chakra but countless hours to master. In these quiet mornings, Nathan also gave thought to his future direction with the blade. He remembered when he'd first begun studying Konoha-style swordsmanship and dreamed of crafting a signature move as elegant and devastating as the famed Mikazuki dance. Until now, he'd never found the time. But here, in the solitude of dawn, Nathan saw his chance to forge something entirely his own. As the sun rose, he tightened his grip, ready to make that dream a reality. Nathan finally had 10 days to rest and recover, time he could use to rethink his strategy. First, he decided to drop the flashy sword techniques. With his current blade skills plus the 3 Magatama Sharingan at his disposal, even a straightforward slash could cripple most opponents. He didn't need acrobatics or elaborate combinations to be dangerous. Next, he abandoned the idea of simply pumping up his sword's raw power. In the Shinobi world, most foes wore little armor. Any solid strike, even unaugmented, would deal serious damage. And against the few heavily defended targets, more power alone might still fail to pierce their protection. Instead, Nathan would lean on his elemental jutsu, specifically the wind release, spiral shuriken he'd been developing. This forbidden technique, later recorded in the Book of Seals as Naruto's signature move, had already proven its might. A single wind-infused projectile could shatter the strongest defenses without draining him by overcharging every sword swing. Confident in this balanced approach, basic sword work enhanced by his Sharingan and backed up by a truly devastating wind technique, Nathan settled in, ready to sharpen both blade and chakra over the next 10 days. Nathan knew that any signature technique he developed had to be practical, something to sharpen his offense when it mattered most. He'd sketched out 3 preliminary concepts so far. The first drew inspiration from the legendary Dance of 3 Suns and Moons, a sword style that wove illusion and reality, unleashing a rapid flurry of strikes to keep an opponent perpetually guessing. But mastering the true dance would demand coordinating multiple shadow clones, and over the long run, that kind of chakra expenditure simply wasn't sustainable. Instead, Nathan decided to borrow a page from the 3rd Hokage's playbook, the Shuriken Shadow Clone technique. By using clones to mask which strike was real, he could achieve a similar blend of feints and actual attacks without draining his reserves. All that remained was figuring out how to acquire it. He had 2 options: activate his Sharingan in the heat of battle and copy the ninjutsu on the spot, or devise his own variant from scratch. The first route would hinge on a rare opportunity, and Hiruzen Sarutobi wasn't exactly handing out private lessons. But there was another possibility: Orochimaru. As the current heir to the 3rd Hokage's legacy, Orochimaru already knew the technique. If Nathan could persuade him to teach it, he'd be well on his way to transforming his first idea into a formidable reality. Nathan considered that he might even observe the technique in battle and copy it on the fly. After all, Sarutobi Hiruzen himself had drawn inspiration from the Shadow Clone technique when he devised his own version, and Nathan had already mastered the original Shadow Clone technique. He was confident he could reverse engineer a Shuriken Shadow Clone technique simply by internalizing its underlying principles. Once he achieved sufficient mastery, as indicated by his proficiency panel, it would be straightforward to innovate. With a solid grasp of the Shadow Clone technique, all he needed was an idea and a clear direction. Nathan's first concept was a move he provisionally called the Shadow Sword technique. In practice, this ability would let him toggle each sword strike between a single blade and multiple simultaneous blades at will. When paired with the Sharingan's ability to exploit an opponent's blind spot, it would be nearly impossible to defend against. His second idea built on the instant body technique. If he could borrow the same instantaneous movement principle, he might integrate it into his swordplay, creating a seamless blend of clones, shuriken, and teleport-like strikes. Nathan smiled to himself, eager to push past existing limits and craft something entirely new and deadly. Nathan wasn't trying to blend the instant body technique with swordplay. That experiment had already proven unworkable. Instead, he saw 2 possible paths: a blinking movement technique or pure swordsmanship. His real ambition was to fuse his wind escape ability with blade work so that body and sword became one through the flow of wind chakra. In that union, movement and intent would align perfectly. The body would follow the sword's path, and the sword would obey the heart's command. He called this new discipline the instant sword technique. To bring the instant sword technique to life, Nathan faced 2 critical challenges. First, he needed absolute mastery over wind chakra, every nuance of its shape and nature, to serve as the living link between himself and his blade. Fortunately, This goal lay within reach once he perfected his wind escape, great breakthrough. Second, his swordsmanship had to improve beyond its current level 5. He needed to reach at least level 6 before attempting the chakra blade fusion. He was already dedicating himself to that training, and at his current pace, the next level wouldn't be far off. Nathan examined the short sword at his side, the one he'd received from a special jonin in Iwagakure. It was forged with a generous amount of chakra-conductive metal, and its balance and edge were undeniably good. Yet good wasn't enough. To execute the instant sword technique properly, he needed a blade of far superior quality, one with exceptional chakra flow efficiency, so he could fuse wind-release chakra with his swordplay seamlessly. His mind drifted to the legendary Kusanagi blade. Rare but renowned for its unmatched ability to channel chakra, it would be perfect. Sadly, such swords seldom surfaced in the ninja world, and even if one did, acquiring it would be near impossible. Frustrated, Nathan shook his head and turned his thoughts elsewhere. He'd already mastered the shadow sword technique, and while the instant sword technique held great appeal, it would demand years of refinement and the right blade. There was, however, another path, a style he valued above all and one he could develop on his own. He had tentatively named it the illusion sword technique. With a steady exhale, Nathan sheathed his short sword. He knew exactly where to begin. Nathan paused to consider the implications. What if he could fuse illusion with swordplay so that each blade strike carried the power of genjutsu? Such an attack would be nearly impossible to defend against. The key lay in his illusion Sharingan. At its highest upgrade, he could cast illusions simply through the movements of his hands and feet, movements that naturally encompassed sword techniques. By channeling the same guiding motions into his blade work, he could infuse every swing with an illusionary effect. Right now, his Genjutsu Sharingan proficiency sat at level 6, 2,310 points out of 10,000, leaving him fewer than 8,000 points from achieving level 7, the state of perfection. In chakra terms, the T-gap amounted to about 600,000 chakra points. Even without tapping into any external chakra batteries, Nathan knew he could accumulate that much chakra in a single month. It was a goal well within reach, and once he deployed to the front lines, capturing enemy combatants to serve as living chakra batteries would make amassing those reserves almost effortless. At that point, weaving illusions into every sword strike wouldn't just be possible, it would become his signature weapon. Nathan felt a hollow pang as he contemplated the mountain of work still ahead. Thankfully, with a solid plan in hand, all he had to do was tackle each task one at a time. Gathering his resolve, he shook off his worries and resumed his swordsmanship practice. Chapter 152, Promotion to Jonin and a Fateful Meeting. Nathan was deep in concentrated sword training, each precise cut and parry honed to perfection, when a figure suddenly came rushing toward him. He halted mid-strike, planting his feet and straightening his posture as the newcomer broke through the trees. The young shinobi bowed respectfully and called out, "Uncle Uchiha!" Indeed, the man charging up to him was the Uchiha Jonin he had served under on 2 missions already. The Jonin scanned Nathan from head to toe, then nodded with evident approval. "I've read your mission report," he said, his voice both steady and impressed. "Very well done." Nathan said nothing, waiting patiently for the rest. The Jonin continued, "Over the past 3 days, the command center has verified every detail of your report. Considering the difficulty of the assignment and your demonstrated skill in the field, they agree you possess all the qualities required of a Jonin. In principle, your promotion has been approved." A spark of excitement flashed in Nathan's eyes, though he maintained a calm exterior. Inside, however, he felt the weight of his accomplishment and the promise of even greater challenges to come. Nathan knew all too well that Jonin was just a rank. What really mattered was one's own strength. If he proved powerful enough, even a Jonin could survive and flourish. Yet promotion did bring tangible benefits, more freedom in choosing assignments and a voice in the village's most important decisions. After all, in every ninja village the Jonin formed the backbone of the force. Even the Kage had to win their support to enact policy. Lost in these thoughts, he barely registered when the Uchiha Jonin standing before him spoke again. "Prepare yourself," the elder said. Tomorrow morning, the council convenes to announce your promotion to Jonin. Every Jonin without an active mission must attend. It's a chance not only for you to meet your fellow Jonin, but also for them to see who you are. I understand, Uncle, Nathan replied. Nathan glanced around at the clearing, the trees and ground scarred by countless sword slashes, and heard the soft voice of the Uchiha Jonin behind him. It seems you're deep in training. I won't disturb you. Before Nathan could reply, the Jonin turned, raised his hand in a brief salute, and vanished in a flicker of space-time. Thank you, sir, Nathan called after him. Please take care. But the Uchiha was already gone. Nathan watched the empty air for a moment, murmuring to himself, a mission. Shaking his head, he drew the dagger from his belt and resumed his exercises. Blade met air and wood in a steady rhythm as the hours slipped by. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, Nathan checked his status panel by starlight. In a single day's hard work he had advanced 134 points in the reflecting heart technique, boosted his Sharingan's evolution level by 134 points, earned 5 points in sword art, bringing that proficiency to nearly 60, with over 10 points gained just today. A small, satisfied smile curved his lips as he closed his eyes and absorbed the calm of the night. The next morning, at Ninja headquarters, the conference room filled with murmurs as the day's briefing was about to begin. Nathan cast a casual glance over the assembled Konoha Jonin, mentally sorting them into clan shinobi and civilian operatives, and even sketching a rough estimate of their individual strengths. He knew such idle speculation was hardly rigorous, yet it felt better than simply doing nothing. At least he gleaned something useful. The majority of these Jonin bore the emblem of one of the great families, while fewer than 40% were civilian-born. That ratio didn't surprise him. Civilian shinobi find the climb to Jonin status treacherous, lacking the inheritance privileges and steady support their clan peers enjoy. Were it not for their sheer numbers, non-clan Jonin might barely total 30% of the force. Shrugging inwardly at his pointless calculations, Nathan refocused on the key mission briefing at hand. He was unconcerned with the politics of Konoha's hierarchy. His own path lay elsewhere. Still, the exercise gave him something to do while he waited. Unbeknownst to him, those same Konoha Jonin were scrutinizing him in return. Whispers passed along their ranks. The new Uchiha prodigy. He looks calm, too calm. Impressive composure. Dangerous, perhaps? Their expressions ranged from quiet admiration to guarded wariness. But Nathan paid them no mind. He settled back, folded his arms, and sat in silence, ready for whatever came next. Nathan sat quietly in the tent as Orochimaru, the Leaf Village's frontline commander in the Rain Kingdom campaign, stepped inside. The commander's dark eyes flicked briefly to Nathan, but betrayed nothing. Nathan had anticipated this. After all, Orochimaru hadn't lost the 4th Hokage succession contest, nor had he ever been bested, or instantly killed, as rumors went, by Itachi Uchiha's Sharingan. He wasn't yet fixated on the Uchiha power. Nathan had no reason to fear Orochimaru's approval. Orochimaru made his way to the head of the table, cleared his throat, and called the meeting to order. There are 2 items on today's agenda, he announced. First, Uchiha Nathan has passed his final assessment. The village has formally appointed him to the rank of Jonin. Congratulations! A round of applause erupted from the assembled Jonin. Everyone, whether they wanted to or not, joined in the clapping. Orochimaru allowed a pleased smile to curve his lips, but didn't ask Nathan to introduce himself. There was no need. Nathan's file, including his background and battle record, had already been circulated to everyone in attendance. Everything they needed to know was on paper. No one bothered to introduce themselves. After all, that was a task for the Uchiha clan's own Jonin. Once the presentations concluded, the Uchiha Jonin would formally introduce the newcomers to Nathan. When the polite applause died away, Orochimaru continued, Our second item, should we launch a counter-offensive against Iwagakure? I trust you've all seen the intelligence. Although the raid by Kumogakure ultimately failed, costing the life of the 3rd Raikage, Iwagakure suffered significant losses in turn. Orochimaru's gaze lingered on Nathan, and every other Konoha Jonin followed suit. They all knew whose insights had revealed Iwagakure's weaknesses. Nathan, however, showed no reaction. He sat quietly, staring into space as if lost in thought. In truth, the very structure of this meeting had dredged up unpleasant echoes of a past life, sapping his interest completely. Were it not against protocol, he would have slipped out to continue practicing his swordsmanship. Then shall we seize this moment to strike back at Iwagakure? Orochimaru's question cut through the room, and every officer straightened, ready to weigh in. A lively debate ensued. Some argued that Iwagakure's front lines lay bare. This was the perfect chance to smash their forces while they were vulnerable. Others counseled caution. Yanyin village still held the upper hand overall, and their troops had just secured a decisive victory. Morale was high. If they launched an attack and it was repelled, especially once reinforcements from Yanyin arrived, they risked losing everything they'd gained. Both sides made compelling points, but in the end, it was Orochimaru's decision alone that mattered. He drummed his fingers thoughtfully on the polished oak table. After a long moment, he looked up and announced, "We attack!" A tense silence followed, then nods of assent. Orochimaru's word was law. No one dared question it. The discussion reconvened, this time focusing entirely on the planned assault. For nearly 2 hours, everyone hashed out the finer points, tactics, timing, risk assessments, until all questions were finally resolved. At last, Orochimaru leaned back in his chair, stood, and announced, "That's all for today. Meeting adjourned." With that, he was the first to rise and slip out of the conference room, leaving the others to gather their notes and reflect on what has been decided. Chapter 153. Limits. Once Orochimaru departed, Nathan was escorted by the Uchiha Jonin and introduced to the rest of Konoha's Uchiha elite. There was no idle chatter, only brief, formal greetings. Despite the clan's reputation for volatility and mental fragility, most of those assembled seemed remarkably grounded. Yes, a quiet air of pride clung to them, but it was far from the arrogant, boastful attitude outsiders sometimes imagined. Instead, their minds were acute, even gentle, and their loyalty ran deeper than words could express. As the second Hokage, Senju Tobirama, once observed, no family loves more passionately than the Uchiha. Their bond with one another could, at its peak, outweigh their concern for their own lives. But every virtue harbors a shadow. That same fierce love, if twisted or betrayed, could curdle into something far darker, an all-consuming hatred. Without steady guidance, a wronged Uchiha might undergo a terrifying transformation, teetering on the brink of darkness, and in the worst cases, becoming completely lost to it. This is why so many in Konoha regarded the Uchiha with a mixture of awe and apprehension. No one could predict when such potent passion might explode. Yet for now, before any such spark could ignite, the Uchiha Shinobi were surprisingly easy to befriend. Their camaraderie was genuine, their eyes clear of malice, and their smiles unguarded. Nathan, still absorbing the gravity of what he'd witnessed, felt an unexpected warmth settling in. Here, among these proud yet principled warriors, he sensed both the promise and the peril of the Uchiha legacy. And he understood that the line between devotion and destruction could be startlingly thin. The Konoha Jonin were eager to meet Nathan, the Uchiha prodigy, but he had no taste for small talk. After exchanging polite greetings, he slipped away to the training grounds, preferring the steady rhythm of his exercises to social niceties. According to the mission briefing, he had just 1 week to prepare before departing with his squad for the counteroffensive against Iwagakure. 1 week, he murmured, tapping at his mission console. The window was narrow, but just wide enough. Over the next 7 days, Nathan's world consisted of 3 things: training, eating, and sleeping. He rose before dawn to drill his taijutsu, sparred endlessly through the afternoon, and honed his Sharingan techniques under torchlight well into the night. Brief moments of rest and quick meals were his only respites, yet he pushed himself harder with each passing hour. Fellow shinobi who noticed couldn't help but stare in amazement. Talent mattered, but effort was everything. Nathan embodied that truth completely, a genius who refused to let anything stand between him and victory. As the deadline approached, it was clear that his relentless drive would shape not only his own future, but the fate of the entire mission. Nathan had never felt so cornered. He wasn't even given a chance to catch up. Yet somehow, this very predicament had revealed his true potential to everyone around him. They now recognized him as an indefatigable prodigy. Nathan noticed their curious stares, of course, but he paid them no mind. His sole focus was on cultivation. There simply wasn't time for idle distraction. In the blink of an eye, it was already the day before departure. Early that morning, Nathan lay inside his tent and slowly opened his eyes as the last traces of chakra faded from his mind. He drew in a long, steady breath and settled himself. "Panel," he commanded. Instantly, a translucent sky-blue HUD appeared in his field of vision, his proficiency panel, ready to display every detail of his progress. Nathan Uchiha, now simply Nathan, had spent nearly 10 days in complete seclusion, pushing every ounce of chakra and willpower he possessed. When he emerged at dawn on the 10th day, his body felt reborn. His chakra reserves had swelled from 22,132 to 23,572. His constitution and spirit sharpened, and every technique he'd honed on the training grounds showed marked improvement. During that stretch, Nathan had refined his chakra refining technique to level 4, 1,823, 2,000, edged closer to mastery in the art of reflecting the heart at level 7, 4,885, 20,000, and strengthened his swordsmanship to level 5, 1,690 or 5,000. His healing jutsu, Rasengan, shadow clone technique, and even his chakra absorption skill had all advanced. Only the Phoenix Immortal Fire technique and Magic Shackle technique remained untapped at level 5, waiting for the day he'd need them most. But the crown jewel of his progress was his Sharingan. Yesterday it had hovered at 8,724 out of 10,000 Magatama. Today it teetered on the brink of perfection at 9,999. If he could make this final leap, he'd unlock the ultimate evolution of the Uchiha's bloodline. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and centered himself in the quiet of the early morning mist. A faint hum of chakra rose in his chest, then spilled outward like ripples across a still pond. Nathan's eyelids flickered open, and the world shifted. Where his pupils had been dark obsidian, there now burned 2 crimson orbs ringed with 3 Magatama each. Delicate veins of scarlet light webbed around his irises, casting the world in stark, vivid clarity. Every leaf, every blade of grass, and every faint breeze carried new information, depths of detail no ordinary eye could perceive. Nathan released a slow breath, savoring the power coursing through him. He had reached the ultimate state of his Sharingan. From here on, nothing would stand in his way. Nathan sat alone in the tent with his Sharingan active. 3 Magatama beads hovered in the blood-red depths of his eyes, and a palpable pressure filled the cramped space. An unsuspecting outsider passing by, even without falling victim to his genjutsu, would likely be cowed by that oppressive aura. Few could hope to summon more than 60 or 70% of their strength under such weight. After a moment of testing that invisible force, Nathan let his eyelids fall shut, deactivating the Sharingan. He murmured to himself, "Is this what it feels like, just before an evolution?" If that nascent 3 Magatama form was already so formidable, he dared not fathom the power of a fully evolved eye. In his memories of a past life, he'd learned that awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan grants strength on par with a Kage. Yet until now, he'd never known its true heft. Literally, the way its energy pressed down on his body. The thought of pushing beyond this threshold sent a fresh wave of apprehension through him. If the current strain was this intense, what crushing burden would the Mangekyo bring? Nathan frowned as he studied the evolution path laid out before him. Transforming a 3 Magatama Sharingan into the Mangekyo was not a simple matter of adding another Tomoe. Gaining the first and second Magatama, or the second and third, was largely a matter of accumulation, a mostly quantitative improvement with only minor qualitative shifts. But unlocking the Mangekyo was a profound, all-new metamorphosis, a true qualitative leap. He had a hunch that the moment his Sharingan blossomed into the Mangekyo, his spiritual attribute would surge by at least 5 points, enough to eclipse his current 15 points of mental power. In other words, his mental strength would nearly double overnight. The physical toll on his body would be immense. He was not yet ready for that kind of strain. "No," he muttered to himself. "I need to raise my constitution first." Closing the interface panel, Nathan gave his newly boosted swordsmanship proficiency, now over 500 points higher, a satisfied nod. He slipped out of the tent, determination in every step. 30 minutes later he returned, 2 meticulously sealed scrolls tucked under his arm. Tonight's training was about to begin. Nathan had just exchanged his logistics department merit points for 2 A-rank medical ninjutsu scrolls, palm fairy technique and chakra scalpel. Ordinarily, he wouldn't have had nearly enough points to claim such advanced skills. Konoha's special treatment of medical ninjas, however, ened the door. The department's only stipulation was that Nathan demonstrate his own medical ability first. After all, he wasn't on the official medical ninja roster. Calling up his level 4 healing technique, Nathan performed a quick, flawless demonstration. In a wartime setting, rules could be stretched, and both palm fairy technique and chakra scalpel were already relatively well known in the ninja world, so secrecy wasn't a major issue. Convinced, the logistics officers handed over the scrolls on one condition: Nathan must help treat the injured soldiers in the coming days. He agreed at once. Unlike most ninjutsu, medical arts don't advance rapidly through solitary practice alone. Real battlefield experience, treating real wounds, speeds mastery far more effectively. With his newly acquired techniques, Nathan was ready to begin. Nathan felt uneasy. His progress in medical ninjutsu was too slow, and he couldn't turn down the chance to speed it up. Determined, he resolved to pour all his effort into raising his healing technique to its limit. He would harness the condensed yang chakra to warm his body, thereby accelerating the growth of his physique attribute. He glanced at the 2 scrolls in his hand, advanced fire-style techniques, and sighed. Before tackling them, he needed to push his healing technique as far as it could go. After all, once he'd mastered the Great Fireball and Dragon Flame styles, learning the Phoenix Fire and Dragon Fire techniques would be far quicker. Even though healing technique was only a C-rank ninjutsu right now, and might offer little immediate benefit to the A-rank Palm Immortal technique or Chakra Scalpel, any edge was worth the effort. Shaking his head to dispel lingering doubts, Nathan settled into a calm posture and began his serious practice of the healing technique. Since there's no longer anyone to serve as a test subject, Nathan can only refine his technique bit by bit. Still, he isn't bored. In every practice session, he can see himself getting better. Chapter 154. The Mission Begins. The next morning, Nathan set out at the head of a well-equipped Konoha Jonin squad, leading hundreds of mid-level shinobi toward the frontline stronghold bordering the Hidden Rock Village. Dozens of supply carts trailed behind them, each loaded with standard ninja tools, kunai, shuriken, smoke bombs, and the like, provisions drawn from Konoha's reserves for this counteroffensive. Despite the show of force, Nathan couldn't hide his doubts. 2 years of continuous war had stretched Konoha's manpower thin. Even if they succeeded in capturing 1 or 2 enemy outposts, holding them against reinforcements from the Hidden Rock Village would be a monumental task. Yes, they might inflict heavy casualties on Iwagakure's soldiers, but with the rock forces vast and seemingly indifferent to cannon fodder losses, the attrition could easily tip in their favor. In a war of exhaustion, Nathan feared Konoha would ultimately pay the steeper price. Yet orders were orders, and there was no turning back now. Nathan stood with the village leaders, watching the battlefield reports flicker across the scroll. There was no avoiding a fight. Every hour they delayed, the Hidden Stone Village would dispatch the 10,000 shinobi currently besieging and poised to kill the Third Raikage. Even if only a third of those troops pressed forward, it would be more than enough to overwhelm Konoha's front lines. Once that happened, they'd be back to the old pattern, the Hidden Stone's superior numbers slowly grinding down Konoha's defenses. It was a slow, inevitable death by attrition. Orochimaru must have seen it too. That was why he chose to gamble everything now. If he could strike at the momentary weakness in the enemy's formation and eliminate a large slice of their forces, then even a later withdrawal would leave Konoha's front lines secure, at least for the time being. But Nathan, armed with memories from his previous life, knew better than anyone that Orochimaru's gamble was doomed to fail. If it had any real chance of succeeding, Konoha wouldn't already be teetering on the brink. Nathan's mind raced with caution as he rode. He reminded himself again and again, stay alert on the battlefield, expect the unexpected. The Hidden Rock Village could very well have secret weapons hidden among their defenses, and if he fell in battle, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Around him, the wooden wheels of the supply cart rolled steadily, while a squad of Konoha shinobi flanked it like silent shadows, their senses sharp for any sign of danger. 2 days passed in that tense stillness. An army on the march moves far slower than a lone ninja. On his own, Nathan could have returned from the front line in a single day. With the entire unit traveling together, it would take close to 3. Even so, these were elite shinobi capable of grueling forced marches. An ordinary soldier convoy might require 10 days, even half a month, to cover the same distance. Nathan studied the terrain as he walked beside the cart, lips moving under his breath as he ran the timetable through his head. They had roughly half a day's journey left before reaching the enemy's forward base. Once there, they'd rest for 2 days, resupply their chakra, and then strike. The schedule was tight, but the element of surprise had to be maintained. With that thought in mind, Nathan squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Thankfully, the past 2 days passed without a single enemy probe. Otherwise, we might not have recovered in time. Morning came and went in a flash. Before Nathan and his squad reached the rendezvous point, messengers had already been dispatched from the forward base to meet them. Logistics and initial coordination were handled by Shikaku Nara, the veteran Nara clan ninja who also commanded this operation. Once Nathan's patrol and Shikaku exchanged reports, the combined force pressed on. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the forward base, a small farming village chosen for its strategic position. Hundreds of reinforcements poured in, through narrow lanes, instantly crowding the streets and leaving barely any room to rest. Still, no one complained. There was simply no time. The assault would begin in 2 days, and every moment was precious for rest and resupply. After establishing quarters and distributing rations, Shikaku convened a meeting of the senior ninja to assign roles for the upcoming attack. Nathan was placed in the assault squad, his primary mission to neutralize the enemy's high-risk targets, namely their senior ninja operatives. With the plans set, each team dispersed to prepare for the battle ahead, knowing that in 48 hours, the true test would begin. The senior Nara shinobi clearly placed more faith in Nathan's raw combat prowess than in any other of his abilities. Nathan didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed the chance to face opponents who could truly challenge him. It was the fastest way to sharpen his swordsmanship. After all, sword skills are meant for the battlefield, and while alone practice can boost proficiency, nothing accelerates growth like real combat. He'd learned that lesson in the land of Earth. Time constraints had kept him from drilling endlessly, yet every skirmish raised his blade skill a notch. True, his shadow clone had been a tremendous help, but the crucible of battle was what really forged improvement. Now, with his 3 Magatama Sharingan fully matured, ordinary shinobi no longer posed a threat. Finally, he could cast aside any lingering worry and hone his swordsmanship through genuine, evenly matched fights, a perfect outcome for a warrior. 2 days later, evening settled over the camp. After dinner, Nathan and the others gathered their gear for inspection. No words were spoken. The only sound was the steady clink of metal as shuriken and kunai were tested, blades tapped, and straps double-checked in the gathering twilight. A heavy gloom settled over the entire base. 10 minutes later, the inspection was complete, and the Nara clan's jonin called the teams to assemble. Under the command of more than 20 jonin, the Konoha shinobi formed 4 units and surged forward in a broad, fan-shaped formation toward the Hidden Stone Village outpost. By plan, the assault would officially begin at 8 o'clock that evening, so they needed to be in position well beforehand. This operation wasn't just another skirmish. Every frontline outpost facing the Hidden Stone Village would launch simultaneous strikes. Most of those attacks were feints. The real weight of the offensive rested on their shoulders. Once they achieved a clear breakthrough, the other bases would exploit the opening, pressing the advantage until the Hidden Stone Village was fully encircled. In the grand strategy of this campaign, they were quite literally the tip of the spear. Only by tearing down Hidden Rock Village's outer defenses can the larger counterattack succeed, and that's how critical their mission is. Under cover of darkness, Nathan and his 4 Konoha squads closed in, stopping just under 5 kilometers from the enemy's central compound. Over the past few nights, their scouting parties had confirmed one crucial detail. Once night falls, Hidden Rock Village pulls its perimeter inward. Their garrison is too thin to patrol far beyond the base, so they bunch their forces around the heart of their defenses. That contraction is the window Nathan's team has been waiting for. All they need to do is neutralize the sentries dotting the outward ring, then they can slip unnoticed to within a kilometer of the village walls and launch the main assault. Silence pressed in around them as Nathan counted off the approach. The 4 squads advanced in lockstep, every movement precise and soundless. The fate of the coming battle, and of countless lives, hinged on what happened next. Using the Byakugan, we'd spotted Iwagakure's hidden sentries long before they became a threat. The special Jonin assassination team moved in with ruthless precision. One target after another fell, as methodical and efficient as an assembly line. 30 minutes later, our group Krur FT up to the 1-kilometer defensive perimeter of the Iwagakure stronghold. By then, silence was all but impossible. Sure enough, just minutes later, an enemy patrol rounded a bend and exposed our position. Chapter 155, In Vain Boom. A deafening explosion rocked the night, and a crimson fireball briefly banished the darkness. From the direction of the blast, frantic shouts rose from the defensive perimeter of Hidden Rock Village. Teams were rushing toward the epicenter, except Nathan's squad. The other 2 undercover teams also held their positions, remaining eerily silent. This wasn't a setback. It was all part of the plan. According to the mission briefing, once one team revealed its position, it would draw the enemy's full attention and firepower. Meanwhile, the still hidden squads would surge forward to strike at Huanglong and throw the Hidden Rock Ninja Patrol into disarray. In theory, the diversion would break the enemy's rhythm, allowing all 3 teams to complete their objectives swiftly and with minimal losses. As seconds ticked by, the shouts grew louder, gunfire drew nearer, and the distinctive crack of exploding tags rang out more frequently. Even from this distance, Nathan could tell how fierce the battle had become, but he and his teammates remained perfectly still, ready to move on the signal, and trusting that their comrades up front could hold the line long enough. 5 minutes later, Nathan's 100-man squad sprang into action, racing straight toward the Iwagakure stronghold ahead. At the same moment, the 2 other 100-man contingents, whose positions had remained concealed, broke cover and charged in from the flanks. Because none of the teams had bothered to mask their movements, Iwagakure scouts spotted them almost at once. Alarms blared through the fortress, gates were bolted shut, signal fires were lit, and hidden defenses were activated. Only then did Nathan fully appreciate the size of the garrison before him. A typical Konoha frontline outpost fields 100 to 120 shinobi, usually organized under 3 to 5 jonin, including special jonin. Among the rank and file, 2/3 are chunin and 1/3 genin. By contrast, Iwagakure, the most populous ninja village in the world, had mustered between 150 and 180 fighters here. Though their jonin leadership still numbered just 3 to 5, their lower ranks were evenly divided between chunin and genin, giving them a formidable depth that Nathan had not anticipated. Nathan scanned the battlefield and replayed the latest reconnaissance report in his mind. According to their scouts, Onoki should have taken 100 men from this Iwagakure outpost, leaving only 50 to 80 defenders behind. Yet, when Nathan's team arrived, they counted nearly 50 more shinobi than the report had indicated. It was obvious those extra troops had slipped back in under cover of darkness. He knew exactly why. The Iwagakure commander was laying a trap, or at least trying to ward off any Konoha assault by inflating his numbers. If every Earth Village stronghold was reinforced this way, their feint could stall an entire Konoha advance. Still, Nathan reminded himself there was no cause for alarm. Even with these hidden troops, the total strength of the outpost barely matched their own force, and on average, Iwagakure ninjas were no match for shinobi from Konoha. At worst, their attack would be delayed. They wouldn't suffer a catastrophic defeat. After all, it was only a diversionary move. The enemy's goal wasn't to win here. It was simply to pin down Konoha's forces and prevent them from marching to another front. Finally, their duel would tip the balance of the entire skirmish. Thoughts raced through Nathan's mind as he broke from his squad and charged straight at the lead Iwagakure shinobi. The enemy barely had time to react. He flicked his arm and shouted, "Fire!" Instantly, kunai tore through the air like a deadly hailstorm. Most shinobi would have faltered under such an onslaught, but Nathan pressed on without hesitation. He flashed his 3 Tomoe Sharingan, and suddenly every kunai's trajectory slowed, crystal clear in his vision. Nathan weaved through some of the missiles, then drew the short sword at his waist in a single fluid motion. Steel rang against steel, punctuate, by the sickening thunk of blade meeting flesh. Deflected kunai spun back into the Iwagakure ranks, impaling several genins squarely in the chest with ruthless precision. Nathan's Sharingan cut through the ranks, registering shock, fear, and regret on his enemies' faces. He felt nothing. This was a battlefield. Everyone was responsible for their own survival. Pulling his gaze away, he refocused on the Iwagakure Jonin who had dared to step forward. The Magatama in his Sharingan spun into motion, its hypnotic power fully awakened. Sharingan? The Jonin reacted instantly, his voice cracking as he recognized the legendary eye. He slammed his lids shut and dove back into his squad's formation. With his primary target effectively blinded, Nathan shifted his sights to the lower-ranked stone ninjas who hadn't managed to look away in time. A rapid series of thuds echoed across the clearing as each unsuspecting ninja collapsed under the weight of his genjutsu. They'd closed their eyes just in time to avoid being trampled, but dropping unconscious in the midst of battle was hardly a better fate. Nathan didn't stand alone. Behind him, more than 100 Leaf Shinobi surged forward the moment the Iwakure team's formation wavered. As the stone ninjas were forced to split their attention, Konoha's reinforcements leapt into the fray, engaging the enemy in a sweeping counterattack. Unperturbed, Nathan closed the gap on the Iwagakure Jonin who had tried to flank him. The Jonin, realizing he was outmatched by Nathan's Sharingan, barked orders to 3 nearby Chunin. Cut him off. Don't let him use his genjutsu. The 3 young ninja tightened their grip on kunai, their expressions grim. They knew a single Sharingan user could turn the tide of battle, but if they worked together, they might contain him. Nathan let out a low chuckle. You'll need more than 3 Chunin to stop me. In an instant, he activated his body flicker technique and vanished from sight. The Jonin snarled in frustration, while Ichiki, the Chunin on the right, scrambled into position, kunai at the ready. But instead of a direct assault, all he caught was a faint afterimage drifting past him, like the shadow of a striking hawk. Nathan had already repositioned himself for his next move. Whoosh! A shuriken sliced through the air where Nathan's afterimage had just flickered. Ishika! To your left! Barked the Iwagakure Jonin, issuing his next command. Ishika whipped her head around, but all she saw was another Nathan illusion. Before she could even blink, the Jonin's kunai stabbed through that phantom form. And that was only the beginning. Nathan flowed from one flash body jutsu to the next, vanishing and reappearing at blinding speed. The Iwagakure Chunin, so focused on guarding against his Sharingan illusions, could only hesitate and await their Jonin's orders. But no chain of commands could keep pace with Nathan's tactics for long. In an instant, he rematerialized at the side of one unsuspecting Chunin. The hypnotic power of his Sharingan flashed to life. One look was all it took. The Chunin's legs gave out, and they crumpled unconscious to the ground. No sooner had that happened than the Jonin lunged in Nathan's direction, chakra flaring around a spinning kunai. Nathan drew his short sword in a single fluid motion and met the attack blade to blade, sparks flying from the impact. The Iwagakure Jonin cursed under his breath as he barked orders at his Chunin. One of you, of equal rank, needs to pair with me. Only then can we hope to keep Nathan's Sharingan in check. But the more he shouted commands, the more he telegraphed his position. Nathan was already watching, waiting for the slightest crack in their defense. Seizing his chance, Nathan struck. He darted toward the nearest Chin, launching a series of lightning-fast blows that scattered the group. With one fighter down, he relaxed into his rhythm, exploiting every opening. In less than 5 minutes, each of the Iwakure Chunin, summoned by their Jonin to assist, lay unconscious on the ground. Only one opponent, Nentit, remained, Ishida Shinsuke, the Jonin himself. Nathan allowed himself a mocking grin as he stepped forward. Looks like it's just the 2 of us now. The real battle starts here. He didn't wait for a reply. With a powerful double kick, he rocketed across the rocky clearing like a human cannonball. In an instant, Nathan materialized in front of Ishida. The Jonin barely had time to react, raising his kunai to guard against the oncoming onslaught. Chapter 56, Ghost Sword Clang. The kunai rang against Nathan's dagger in a sharp metallic cry. He stood only a few feet from Shinsuke Ishida, a faint smile flickering across his lips as he activated the hypnotic power of his Sharingan. But Ishida, anticipating the trick, tore his gaze away the instant the jutsu tried to take hold. Nathan's smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a cool, deadly focus. The cocky swagger he'd worn during his direct assault on those Iwagakure Chunin slipped away, and his fighting style shifted into something strange and unpredictable. No longer charging straight in, he flowed with uncanny fluidity, an expressionless phantom amid flickering shadows. The moment Ishida looked elsewhere, Nathan blurred out of sight, only to reappear in his opponent's blind spot. His dagger shot forward in a silent, deadly arc, aiming straight for Ishida's heart. A cold shock of alarm raced through Ishida's chest. He lurched back, barely sidestepping the blade that whistled past him. Nathan landed lightly on his feet and wasted no time, every muscle coiled, every breath measured, ready to press the advantage. The clash of steel still hung in the air as both fighters braced themselves for the next exchange, each knowing that a single misstep could be fatal. Nathan's dagger sliced through empty air. He didn't flinch. With a quiet shift of weight, he vanished from Ishida Shinsuke's sight and reappeared behind him. Before Ishida could even turn, Nathan lunged again. Alerted by the movement in his peripheral vision, Ishida twisted aside, narrowly avoiding the blade. Again, Nathan's strike found only air. Yet he showed no disappointment, only an unshakable calm. His crimson Sharingan eyes tracked Ishida's footfalls, reading muscle tension and predicting his next move. Once more, he slipped into the shinobi's blind spot and launched another silent thrust. Even a skilled ninja like Ishida Shinsuke was forced onto the defensive. Without the element of surprise, he could barely manage a guard, and at best, only 60 or 70% of his true strength. That single advantage explains the whispered warning spreading through the shinobi world. If you ever face an Uchiha ninja alone, run. The caution wasn't mere superstition. The Sharingan's innate power, its ability to cast hypnotic illusions, could shatter an opponent's focus in a heartbeat. No hand seals, no chanting, no fanfare. One look into those spinning crimson tomoe, and many a hardened shinobi would find his mind slipping away. And so Nathan kept pressing forward, every movement silent, every attack poised to strike from the shadows of Ishida's gaze. Although the Sharingan's advantage is subtle, in a high-risk battle, even a momentary lapse in awareness can be fatal. That's why many shinobi, Uchiha and non-Uchiha alike, avoid holding each other's gaze for long periods. Ironically, steering clear of direct eye contact only weakens their combat effectiveness. Uchiha warriors, by contrast, can exploit the Sharingan's insight to anticipate an opponent's moves and seize the initiative. When two fighters are evenly matched, and the Uchiha user has mastered his dojutsu, ordinary shinobi simply cannot keep pace. Of course, this superiority depends on two conditions. First, that the opponents are of similar strength. Second, that the Uchiha has honed his Sharingan skills. A Jonin facing a freshly awakened Uchiha Jinin is unlikely to be impressed, and an Uchiha who has yet to learn the full extent of his ocular powers won't inspire fear in his adversaries. Nathan, however, fulfills neither of those limiting factors. Far from relying on the Sharingan alone, he has developed a sword style that fuses Konoha Kenjutsu with traditional Uchiha blade techniques. This hybrid Konoha Uchiha style elevates his combat prowess beyond what ordinary ninjas or even typical Uchiha can muster, allowing Nathan to dominate the field with both precision and power. Nathan's mere presence seemed to suffocate his opponents. In Ishida Shinsuke's eyes, the world narrowed to a blur of steel, daggers and blades thrust at him from impossible angles, and the occasional flicker of Nathan's garb as he vanished and reappeared in a heartbeat. Beyond those fleeting images, nothing registered. Shinsuke dared not hunt down those traces. Moments ago, he tried to meet Nathan head-on, but the instant their gazes locked, Nathan's eyes ensnared him in a genjutsu. He'd barely managed to stagger back before feeling cold steel brush his throat. From that shock alone, he vowed never to risk a straight fight again. He considered fleeing, yet Nathan refused to grant him even that courtesy. With consummate swordsmanship, Nathan stayed glued to his side, driving Shinsuke into a brutal, up-close duel. And with the Sharingan's insight, every subtle shift in Shinsuke's stance was read before it happened. There was no opening to create distance, no time to draw breath, let alone mold chakra for hand seals. Any hope of unleashing ninjutsu was snuffed out before it could begin. Nathan's swordplay and lightning-fast reflexes left no room for hesitation. If his opponent even paused to form a hand seal, Nathan could end the fight with a single stroke. Beads of cold sweat rolled down Ishida Shinsuke's cheeks as he remained hyper-alert, every muscle tensed for Nathan's next move. Trapped like a fish in a net, the harder he struggled, the tighter Nathan's relentless pressure became. Whoosh! The hiss of air slicing past snapped Shinsuke back to reality. Instinctively, he brought his kunai up in a sideways arc and met Nathan's blade with a metal-on-metal clang. The impact vibrated up his arm, but he deflected the attack just in time. How many times has he done that? Shinsuke thought, heart pounding. He forced himself to stay calm. There was only one option now, slip into Nathan's blind spot and strike back. Over the last few minutes, despite bleeding from several shallow wounds, Shinsuke had begun to read Nathan's rhythm. Nathan pressed forward with skill and precision, but every fighter revealed a pattern eventually. If Shinsuke could identify the opening, he might just turn the tables. Nathan hunched behind the shattered wall, weighing his dwindling options. If he could hold Ishida Shinsuke off a little longer, he might find a way to shake free of this struggle and vanish from the battlefield for good. A soft click echoed across the courtyard. Ishida stiffened, sensing movement just in front of him. He blinked, and in the same instant, Nathan's voice rang out. Magic! Yao Hong's technique! Nathan's hands wove through the air, tracing the final seals of the spell. With a surge of crimson light, he unleashed the perfected Sharingan illusion he had spent countless hours mastering. Pain erupted in Ishida's head, sharp as if iron nails had been driven through his skull. His limbs froze, as though impaled by giant rivets. Fully conscious, he could neither blink nor call out. Ishida had spent the entire fight on the defensive, forced into a relentless rhythm Nathan set from the start. Over time, he'd managed to anticipate Nathan's strikes, but under pressure, those conditioned reflexes had become a trap. When Nathan shifted tactics in an instant, Ishida simply couldn't adjust. And now he lay pinned by Nathan's spell, every muscle locked tight, utterly at his mercy. Nathan seized the moment and unleashed his signature spell, Magic Jail Hang Technique. An invisible cage of chakra constricted around Ishida Shinsuke, pinning him in place. Shinsuke's body trembled violently as he strove to break free, eyes blazing with defiance. Nathan hesitated for only a heartbeat. He had considered keeping Shinsuke alive as a makeshift chakra battery, but his prisoner's sheer ferocity convinced him otherwise. A faint metallic hiss filled the air as Nathan drew his short sword. With measured precision, he slid the blade's tip along Shinsuke's chest. The pressure instantly nullified the jail hang binding. Shinsuke gasped, muscles relaxing as sensation flooded back into his limbs, only to be replaced by a mounting dread. Before he could react, the blade drove forward. Warm blood pooled at the corner of Shinsuke's mouth. His vision darkened, but he forced his clouded gaze onto Nathan's face. With a final ragged breath, he croaked, "Ghost sword." Nathan cocked his head, repeating the words thoughtfully. Ghost sword? The name felt uncanny, yet fitting. Blending his own swordsmanship with the Sharingan's eerie foresight had made his attacks nearly impossible to track. Like a wandering spirit, his blade struck from the shadows, and now it had a name. It was no exaggeration to call it the Ghost Sword. Nathan had no idea that, in the months ahead, the name Ghost Sword Nathan would become his sole epithet, echoing across the battlefields of Rain Country, and growing into a forbidden legend that all would come to fear. Chapter 157. Tactics Squeak. Nathan yanked his short sword free from Ishida Shinsuke's chest. The defeated ninja crumpled to the ground, and Nathan swept his gaze across the field. The Rock Village Shinobi had been carved into fragments and were now locked in bitter combat with Konoha's forces. Even if the Rocks had managed to sneak in a few dozen extra fighters, they still numbered barely 100, Against Konoha's nearly 500, the outcome was never in doubt. So Nathan's only real concern wasn't winning this skirmish, but whether the next phase of the operation would go off without a hitch. But that was a problem for later. Right now, he wanted to see what he'd gained from the battle. After all, his main reason for joining this task force was to beef up his skills and earn experience. If the rewards weren't worth the effort, there was no point in pushing himself so hard. He opened his status panel and zeroed in on the swordsmanship skill. His proficiency had jumped by more than 20 points since the last fight, nearly as much as he'd expect from half a day of intense training. Nathan couldn't help the satisfied grin curling his lips. Nathan's thoughts snapped back to the present as he closed the targeting panel. Scanning the battlefield, he locked onto a sword-wielding jonin from Iwagakure. After a moment's appraisal, Nathan judged his opponent's blade work to be merely average, but even a scrap of meat is still meat. He wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. With 3 graceful sidesteps, Nathan slipped past the flurry of attacks and planted himself directly in front of the Iwagakure shinobi. Clang! Steel rang out as he raised his short sword and met the enemy's strike head-on. Without breaking his guard, he called over his shoulder, "I've got this one. You go command the others." His fellow Leaf Jonin, who'd been locked in battle with a different Iwagakure opponent, hesitated for a heartbeat. He glanced back at where Nathan had just fought, and his blood ran cold at the sight of the fallen Ishida Shinsuke. Swallowing hard, he straightened and gave a single, decisive nod. Understood. That one word carried all the trust he could muster. Both he and his enemy were only special jonin, yet he knew Nathan would handle the rest. However, Daido couldn't help glancing at Ishida Shinsuke's fallen body. Shinsuke was a true jonin, and yet he'd been cut down by Nathan in mere minutes. Clearly, the one who should be trembling now was the Iwagakure jonin standing before him. When Daido took in the sight of his comrade's corpse, a cold shock ran through him, and the instinct to flee nearly overwhelmed him. Nathan's scarlet-red Sharingan only deepened his dread. But since Nathan had already chosen to fight, Daido's options were gone. There would be no escape. Before Daido could gather his thoughts, Nathan relaxed his grip on the dagger, slid it across his palm, and vanished in a blur. In the next instant, he reappeared at Daido's side and swung his sword in a vicious arc toward Daido's neck. Warned by the lethal intent in Nathan's movement, Daido forced himself back to reality. He leapt sideways and slashed out with his own sword, determined to turn defense into offense. Yet Nathan had anticipated that move the moment Daido's arm tensed and his stance shifted. With a practiced sidestep, Nathan let Daido's blade slice only through air. Before Toyama Dadu could even regain his balance, Nathan's second strike was already on its way. As always, attacking from Dadu's blind spot left him with barely a breath to react. He could only twist aside and hope for the best. With Dadu's response window drastically narrowed, Nathan pressed the assault, probing every angle Dadu couldn't see. Before long, Dadu found himself in the same position as Ishida Shinsuke, pinned on defense, forced to parry blow after blow without any chance to counter. Yet Nathan didn't rush in for the kill. Instead, he used this lull to fine-tune his tactics. On the surface, it might seem as simple as activating the Sharingan, ambling the opponent's perception, and then targeting the gaps in his vision. But any ninja who's reached the rank of Jonin has seen those tricks before and learned to adapt. Rely on a single gambit, and a seasoned foe will crack it in minutes. Or worse, flip it back on you. So Nathan stayed alert, tweaking his approach with every feint and thrust, determined to stay one step ahead. This tactic may look simple, but it's deceptively complex. You must constantly read your opponent's movements and, in the same instant, devise the perfect response. And by response, I don't just mean dodging. You need to plan your counterattack the moment you evade. Only then can you seize control of the fight. One misstep, and your enemy will exploit the opening, forcing you to start all over again. To trap an opponent without fail, every move must be flawless. Of course, none of this would be possible without the Sharingan's assistance. No ordinary eye can process so many variables in a split second. Yet even the Sharingan isn't enough on its own. Only extensive combat experience lets you see through every feint and deception. And to ensure your counterstrikes land, you must be equally skilled in close-quarters fighting. Nathan, for example, has mastered level 5 swordsmanship. Even so, Nathan spent a long time drilling the sequence before he could execute it smoothly. In the beginning, every opponent he faced would shatter his rhythm. Although he ultimately defeated them with ninjutsu, it was clear this tactic was anything but easy to master. At present, it only works reliably against average jonin. In a clash with stronger ones, he still can't fully trap them. And because it's designed for single combat, it falls apart the moment multiple enemies attack. Despite these drawbacks, the drill has been invaluable for honing his swordsmanship. Right now, Nathan can feel his blade skill improving steadily, even without checking his status panel. He isn't the only one to notice either. Grandmaster Yuan Shan has quietly sensed the same growth. Nathan may understate his own talent, but among their ninja peers, his swordplay already ranks near the top, and it's obvious that such rapid progress demands a certain natural gift. Nathan's desperation only deepened when he realized what was really going on. Yuan Shan Dadu hadn't been holding back. He'd been using Nathan as a live training partner. Dadu's face flickered through a series of emotions as he glanced at the ever-thinning ranks of rock ninjas around them. Then, with steely resolve, he dropped his guard against Nathan's next strike and launched a ferocious counterattack. The instant Dadu's stance shifted, Nathan sensed something profoundly unexpected in the movement. Chapter 158, Unstoppable. Nathan's blade sliced through the training hall's stillness when a subtle shift in the air snapped him out of his concentration. Instantly, the 3 Magatama beads in his Sharingan flared and spun, revealing the exact angle of Daito Toyama's hidden strike. Want to take us both down? Think again, he thought. In one fluid motion, Nathan retracted his short sword just before it could collide with Daito's. He rolled to the side, narrowly escaping a deathly arc of steel that carved through the space he'd occupied barely a heartbeat before. Too slow, he whispered under his breath. Before Daito could recover, Nathan's concealed dagger shot from its sheath. It tore clean through fabric and flesh, embedding itself in Daito's chest with a wet, ripping sound. Blood blossomed across his tunic in a dark, spreading stain. Daito staggered backward, eyes wide with shock and pain, one hand flying to clutch the jagged wound at his breast. A low groan escaped him as he fought for breath, his strength draining with every heartbeat. Daito staggered as blood poured from his wounds, his vision darkening at the edges. He knew that if he didn't stop the bleeding soon, it would be enough to kill him. Sweat beaded on his brow as he looked around desperately. Where was Nathan? How could he have abandoned him now when he needed him most? But Nathan hadn't abandoned him. In the same instant, Daito realized that a cold steel blade drove into his back. Pain exploded through his torso as the dagger's tip pierced his heart and emerged through his chest. He tasted copper in his mouth and coughed up crimson. Daito's free hand went to the dagger's hilt, protruding from his coat. "Is this the end?" he rasped. Every muscle in his body trembled as consciousness threatened to slip away. Memories of home, of his wife's laugh, his child's small hand in his own, flashed through his mind. "If only there had been no war," he whispered, the words fading on his final breath. Nathan pulled the dagger free with a soft whoosh, letting Daito's lifeless body slump forward. Even as he wiped the blade clean on the fallen soldier's tunic, he registered the subtle shift in Daito's emotions, the regrets, the fear. But Nathan didn't allow himself to dwell on it. War demanded its sacrifices coldly, and today, Daito Toyama had been one of them. Nathan sheathed his dagger. The battle lines between the two sides were unmistakably drawn. There was no room in his mind for pity toward the enemy. He scanned the field. Here, the fight was essentially over, with only a few rock ninja left, their strength spent in feeble struggles. From the distant flares of chakra and the shifting dust on other fronts, it was clear those clashes were winding down as well. Rather than hunt for fresh targets, Nathan made his way to the wounded, joining the medical ninjas assigned to his squad. His newly learned healing technique still required real combat experience to master, and these injured soldiers were ideal subjects. To him, it was simply a way to hone his skills. To the others, it looked like the very definition of heroism, charging the fiercest ranks in battle, then tirelessly tending to friends when the fighting ceased. If that wasn't model behavior for a shinobi, what was? Word spread quickly. Fellow Konoha ninja began to regard Nathan with genuine admiration. He heard their private praises, whispered comments about his bravery, his dedication, his willingness to shoulder the worst of the war, and then care for the wounded. Nathan didn't mind the reputation. After all, a good name could serve as its own protection. Still, he remained unbothered by their approval. His focus was on the task at hand and on becoming ever more proficient with his healing jutsu. 30 minutes crept by before the clash finally ended. When the dust settled, Konoha's tally stood at 105 enemy casualties, while suffering 75 injuries of its own, 22 confirmed deaths after medical treatment. On paper, that's almost a 5-to-1 kill ratio in Konoha's favor. Of course, the numbers are misleading. It wasn't sheer skill alone that created such a disparity, but the overwhelming imbalance in troop strength. Konoha had committed nearly 500 shinobi, mostly chunin and jonin, with only a handful of genin, to the fight. In contrast, the Rock Village could muster just over 100 warriors, the bulk of them genin. Put simply, each rock ninja faced 4 or 5 Konoha opponents at once. Under those conditions, it was no surprise the casualty figures looked so lopsided. If the rock ninjas hadn't launched that last-ditch counterattack, Konoha's losses would have been even lower, and the casualty ratio even more one-sided. Of course, not every rock ninja was trapped. They never established a perfect encirclement, so a handful slipped through the lines. In the ninja world, with countless escape jutsus and hidden techniques, no siege is foolproof. Once combat begins, intelligence inevitably leaks out. From there, victory comes down to who stays better prepared and who seizes the opening first. After a brief hour of rest, Nathan and his squad resumed their advance. Their target was Iwagakure's second-line camp. Like Konoha, Iwa's defenses were layered, a series of strongholds arranged to slow an invading army. Nathan's mission was simple in principle but daunting in execution. Press forward, breach each line, and force Iwagakure's outlying fortresses to dispatch relief forces before they could regroup. With that objective clear, they tightened their gear, exchanged determined nods, and moved out, ready to fight their way through the next belt of enemy territory. Orochimaru's plan was disarmingly simple. The Konoha fortress that had staged the earlier fight would now mount a full-scale assault, bearing down on Iwagakure's forward line. In the world of shinobi, elaborate tactics often serve merely as cover for brute strength. What truly matters is how a village's warriors perform under pressure. Orochimaru didn't waste time hatching complex maneuvers. He simply secured the decisive opening strike. Everything that followed would be a matter of who could outfight whom. 90 minutes later, Nathan and his team reached their objective. As he had anticipated, word of the attack had already reached the Rock Village's second-line camp. The Jonin stationed there were waiting on alert, but they had little chance to summon reinforcements. With barely 100 defenders in place, they simply couldn't hold the line. The clash was over in just over half an hour. In the swirl of dust and chakra, Nathan found himself face-to-face with one of the camp's special Jonin. The duel was fierce but brief. A single, perfectly timed strike ended his opponent's resistance. Nathan wished the situation had allowed him to test his skills against more high-ranked foes, but at this makeshift outpost, enemy Jonin were scarce. As the dust settled, he surveyed the fallen, already turning his thoughts to the next wave of battle that awaited them. Nathan glanced around at the swarm of shinobi and the scarce number of high-risk targets. He'd only secured one mission slot because he served on the assault team, charged with eliminating the most dangerous enemies. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been assigned at all. He'd also noticed the veteran ninjas slipping away in small, select groups at the first sign of trouble. Their early withdrawal made it clear that Hidden Rock Village was deliberately conserving its elite fighters for an even tougher battle to come. When that fight finally erupted, those reserved forces would form the spearhead. Resolutely, Nathan vowed to himself, "Next time, we'll have to take out as many opponents as we can." Burying that resolve deep in his mind, he turned back to assist the medical ninja in treating the wounded. As for worries about draining his chakra and weakening his combat effectiveness, he knew those concerns could wait. Nathan's level 5 chakra absorption technique lets him siphon up to 1,000 chakra points in a single second, converting 90% of it directly into his own reserves. All he needs is a moment of skeg, into-skin contact, barely enough time to finish off an opponent to refill his energy. In other words, running out of chakra is no longer a concern. Chapter 159, Encirclement and Killing. After patching up their wounded, Nathan and his team gave themselves an hour's rest before moving out again. By the light of the stars, they pressed on. Over the next few hours, they struck swiftly and silently, wiping out 2 enemy encampments belonging to the Hidden Rock village. At dawn, they had driven their battle line all the way to the village's 3rd defensive perimeter. Despite the brief pauses between skirmishes, the intermittent fighting through the long night had left everyone bone-tired. Still, their initial objective had been met. The Hidden Rock's outlying forts were in disarray, and word had already spread that they had secretly shifted troops under cover of darkness. What had started as a feint was poised to become a full-scale assault, and the convoy of reinforcements would soon arrive to join the fray. When Nathan glanced at his watch, he realized it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. The commander from the Nara clan, overseeing the operation, raised his hand. "Hold positions and rest here for now," he ordered. "We'll not wait for aid to come to us. Our next task is to link up and support the other strongholds." With that, the allied ninjas settled in, catching their breath and preparing to turn the tables. No sooner would the Hidden Rock's defenses regain their footing than Nathan and his comrades would swoop in again, this time to encircle and annihilate the enemy for good. It was obvious the Hidden Rock village had pulled troops from the front lines to reinforce this sector. Their mission now was simply to contain Nathan and his squad. Nathan checked his watch. Just over 3 hours remained before the all-out assault was due to begin. In theory, they could rest. In practice, the Rock Village had other plans. Less than an hour later, scouts from the enemy's 3rd defense line, still their next objective, began to harass the perimeter. Attack was too strong a word. It was more a series of hit-and-run irritations. Shinobi would slip in around their camp, set off explosive tags, or unleash roaring ninjutsu, then melt back into the shadows, determined to deny them a moment's peace. Fed up with the constant disturbance, Nathan abandoned any thought of rest. He reported to his commanding officer, Nara Shisui, and volunteered to reinforce the outer defenses himself. Striding away from the main encampment, he took up a position along the tree line and immediately sensed hidden eyes trained on him. Peering into the dim forest, he made out the faint outlines of Rock Village shinobi crouched among the undergrowth. Channeling his chakra, he probed their presence, yet detected no immediate danger. Still, he remained vigilant, ready for whatever came next. Nathan glanced at the shadows shifting among the trees and shrugged. "Just some Chunin scouts," he muttered. Unfazed, he summoned a squad of Konoha Chunin who had been patrolling nearby and led them into the forest's murky depths. 10 minutes later, they'd driven off the Iwagakure shinobi skulking among the undergrowth. Nathan hadn't slain many, but the sudden counterattack stunned their enemies long enough to force them back. Still, the probes didn't cease. These operatives clearly answered to higher-ups who ordered them to test Konoha's defenses at every turn. With a momentary lull, Nathan took the chance to restore his chakra reserves and refine his jutsu. It wasn't a full recharge, but every bit counted. Time slipped by, and before he knew it, mid-morning light filtered through the canopy. A tense quiet settled over both camps. Konoha on one side, Iwagakure on the other, and each seemed ready to move at a word. Nathan squared his shoulders. It was time to join the coordinated assault the other garrisons were about to launch. There was only one plausible reason Iwagakure had decided to strike now. Their reinforcements had either already arrived or were close at hand, and they feared Nathan's group might slip away before the battle truly began. Nara Shisui picked up on this instantly and issued a single, "Deses, I've command. Fall back." Nathan hesitated for a heartbeat, then the plan clicked into place. By pretending to retreat, they would prey on the Stone Village shinobi's eagerness to detain them, luring them out of the safety of their camp. The deception worked flawlessly. No sooner had Nathan's squad filed out of the gates than the rock ninja scrambled into formation and gave chase. It wasn't that Nara Shishui's gambit was some stroke of genius. The stone shinobi had been backed into a corner. Nathan's team had unleashed a ferocious slaughter the previous night, incurring the wrath of Hidden Stone's higher-ups. Those commanders had delivered a single, ruthless order. No matter what, detain or kill Nathan and his companions. That was why, at the faintest hint of an evacuation, the rock ninja leapt out without hesitation. Nathan knew that without the home field advantage, the rock ninjas would be somewhat easier to defeat outside the camp, but only marginally. The Hidden Rock village had dispatched 200 shinobi to reinforce this third-line outpost, and far more of them were mid to upper tier than the usual mix. Lower rankers made up barely a third of the force. At first glance, there was nothing uniquely strategic about this base to explain so many troops. The truth was that every stronghold Nathan and his team had breached, and every rock ninja who'd slipped away, had regrouped here. Only the toughest escapees had made it out alive, and the village had bolstered them by pulling its seasoned mid- and upper-level ninjas from 2 nearby camps. The result was a garrison stronger and larger than any ordinary third-line post. That's why Nathan warned his allies. Even if they drew these shinobi into open battle, it wouldn't be a walk in the park. The sheer talent and numbers of the rock ninjas still posed a serious challenge, no matter how carefully the rebels planned their attack. Nathan's squad still held the advantage in overall strength, so even if this skirmish grew tougher, they wouldn't be overwhelmed. He let Nara Shisui signal the pullback, then halted at a safe distance. Voices rose. Adjust formation. Brace for the rock ninjas' assault. True to form, the Earth Shinobi wasted no time. As soon as they closed the gap, they roared in unison, Earth-style, rock cannon. Dozens of Iwagakure ninjas formed seals, then spat out thumb-sized pebbles. In midair, each stone whirled furiously, drawing in Earth chakra, until it swelled into a fist-sized boulder that slammed toward Nathan's line. Responding instantly, nearly 100 Konoha shinobi let fly their kunai. Blades arced through the twilight, striking the attackers' shields just as the boulders shattered against chakra barriers. Sparks flew, dust billowed, yet neither side flinched. These opening volleys aimed less at grave wounds and more at scattering enemy ranks. When the dust settled, the battlefield lay fractured, formations stretched thin, footing unsettled. Nathan tightened his grip on his kunai, eyes scanning for the first move in the close-quarters clash that would truly decide the fight. Kill! The battle cry from the rock ninja squad rang out like a shockwave. In an instant, it was as if every member had been injected with pure adrenaline. They surged forward, crashing into the Konoha shinobi in a blur of steel and explosive jutsu. Metal clanged against metal. Explosive tags detonated with earth-shaking force, and the air filled with anguished screams. Chaos reigned supreme. Amid the maelstrom, Nathan barely had time to register the carnage. He was suddenly surrounded. 3 Iwakure jonin had him in their sights. Just moments ago, he'd engaged a lone jonin. Before he could react, 2 more swept in to trap him. Their swift coordination left no doubt. Someone had tipped them off about his presence. Nathan's heart pounded as he formed hand seals. He had to break free before they closed in for the kill. Drawing a deep breath, he called on his chakra, ready to unleash whatever it took to survive. Above the thunder of battle, Nathan's resolve, ardent. If his cover was blown, he would adapt, fight smarter, move faster, and prove that no ambush could stop him. With a fierce glare, he launched into action, determined to turn the tables on his would-be captors. Nathan wove between their strikes, narrowly evading each blow as a smug grin crept over his face. Seriously? 3 special jonin couldn't corner and kill him? He thought, amusement dancing in his eyes. A few quick skirmishes had already revealed their true rank. They were nothing more than special jonin, and none had shown any particularly fearsome technique. That distinction hardly concerned him now. As long as they weren't full-fledged jonin, Nathan was more than confident he could handle them. He steadied his breathing and readied himself for the next exchange. Chapter 160. Counterattack. Clang. Nathan's blade met the jonin's strike in a shower of sparks. He barely had time to register the strange sickle-shaped ninja tool before another Iwagakure shinobi lunged in with it. There was no way to parry that curved blade, so Nathan kicked hard off the ground, vaulting into the air as the sickle sliced under his feet and whipped up a gust of wind. He retracted his short sword on the way down, and landing lightly, rolled back 2 meters to regain his stance. Before he could fully recover, several more sharp whistles of kunai tearing through the air reached his ears. In an instant, the 3 magatama in his Sharingan eye began to spin. Through that crimson lens, Nathan saw the precise arcs of each incoming kunai. He blurred sideways, each movement a heartbeat faster than normal perception, and the third Jonin's blade thudded harmlessly into the ground where he'd been standing a moment before. But there was no time to celebrate. As Nathan finished his dodge, the first Iwagakure Jonin, whom he'd blocked at the very start, reappeared out of the swirling dust. With terrifying speed, the shinobi thrust a kunai straight for Nathan's throat. Steel glinted in the dim battlefield light, and for an instant, Nathan froze. His heart pounded as the blade came within a fraction of an inch from cutting him down. Then his eyes narrowed, Sharingan blazing as he prepared to turn the tables. The counterattack was about to begin. Nathan drew a steady breath, planted his feet, and met his opponent's blade head-on. The Iwagakure Jonin showed no mercy, swinging his kunai in relentless, precise arcs. But Nathan's Sharingan guided every movement, and his level 5 swordsmanship dictated each parry. Every kunai strike was met and neutralized. Sweat beaded on the Jonin's brow as exhaustion crept into his limbs. Nathan sensed his opening and prepared to counterattack, only to see another Jonin, this one wielding a hooked sickle, rush in to reinforce his partner. Forced back onto the defensive, Nathan raised his blade just in time to deflect a sickle slash. Then, from the shadows, a third Jonin launched a surprise kunai with lethal intent. Nathan's eyes narrowed. The 3 of them fought with a precision that spoke of long practice together. 2 of the Jonin, one with kunai, the other with a sickle, pressed the attack in tight formation, while the third stayed just beyond reach, probing for a momentary weakness. Their tactic was clear: relentless pressure, exploitation of any opening, then the kill. He kept his stance low and his sword arm firm, his Sharingan predicting every feint and lunge. Though outnumbered, Nathan refused to yield ground. His breathing evened out. He would weather this storm, and when his chance came, he would turn their own coordination against them. They might have fared well against ordinary Jonin, but Nathan was anything but ordinary. Even though the 3 Iwagakure Jonin moved with silent precision, to Nathan they still had exploitable flaws. A kunai whistled toward him, thrown by the lead Jonin. Nathan slipped aside so cleanly the knife only nicked air. The hooked sickle of the second ninja shot in to close the gap, but not quickly enough. In that heartbeat of space, Nathan gathered his chakra and let his Sharingan awaken. The sickle wielder, confident behind his teammates and never once breaking eye contact, found himself ensnared. His body locked stiff, then crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Da Lang! The third Jonin, clutching a kunai, realized something was terribly wrong. With a sharp shout, he dove in front of Sugiyama Dalang, intercepting Nathan's lunging short sword and buying his comrade a moment of safety. Before Nathan could launch a second attack, the Iwagakure Jonin, acting as backup, let fly a volley of shuriken aimed straight for his vital points. Nathan caught the faint hiss of metal slicing through the air, and with a faint smirk, drove off the ground with both feet. He flipped backward, evading the incoming blades by mere inches. Mid-air, he twisted his wrist, and he produced 6 shuriken from his palm. Casting a sharp glance at his distant opponent, he gauged his position in an instant and sent the knives spinning back toward him. Then, without waiting to see the result, Nathan bounced away several times until he'd put a comfortable distance between himself and the 2 Jonin. At that moment, Sugiyama Dalang was just regaining his senses. His eyes widened at the sight before him, a colossal fireball forming in Nathan's outstretched hand. Before anyone could react, Nathan had completed the seals and unleashed the Uchiha clan's signature ninjutsu, fire style, great fireball technique. Drawing on 300 units of chakra, he molded an inferno nearly 3 meters in diameter, its heat so intense it warped the air around it. Nathan felt the scorching heat even from a distance. A massive fireball hurtled toward him, but he didn't flinch. It wasn't that he wasn't afraid of dying, it was just that the 2 Iwa shinobi facing him were already moving. Their kunai sliced through the air as one of them completed a rapid series of hand seals, then drove his palm into the earth. "Earth release, land reform," he shouted. The ground in front of them heaved upward, and a 2-meter-tall slab of stone shot up to form a shield. The fireball smashed into it with a deafening roar. Flames roared around the slab's edges, the superheated air singeing Nathan's cheeks. Crack! A thin fracture appeared in the stone. Nathan tensed, eyes fixed on the spreading fissure. Crack! Crack! The crack spidered outward, shrinking the barrier's remaining strength. The two shinobi exchanged alarmed glances, and then leapt back together, creating just enough space to avoid being crushed when the rock slab finally gave way. As Sugemu Dalong and his companion darted away, the stone slab behind them suddenly detonated, shattering into a hail of burning fragments that exploded outward in every direction. Both men tumbled aside, narrowly avoiding the worst of the blast, but the fiery debris still scorched 3 ragged holes through their tunics. Embarrassed, they glanced at one another. Nathan took advantage of their momentary distraction. He raised his hands, gathering chakra for a follow-up strike. Then the ground beneath his feet shivered. Instinctively, he bounded backward. The instant his toes left the soil, a jagged pillar of rock, nearly 5 feet tall, burst up from the earth where he'd just stood. "Earth escape! Tulong spear!" Nathan's pulse leapt. He recognized the signature jutsu of Iwagakure at a glance. He looked up and saw the culprit, an elder ninja from the Hidden Rock village, crouched a short distance away, both palms planted firmly on the ground. The shinobi's piercing gaze never wavered. He had just launched that spear. Nathan's mind raced. If there was one spear at his heels, there could be more waiting to strike. No time to hesitate. As the earth trembled beneath him once again, he dropped into a low stance, chakra crackling around him, ready for whatever attack came next. Nathan sprang backward just in time to avoid a jagged rock spike that shot up from the exact spot where he'd been standing. That was only the beginning. Over the next few heartbeats, he darted and twisted as nearly 100 more stone pillars erupted in succession. The farther these spikes traveled before breaking the surface, the less warning they gave, and the faster they struck. Without his 3 Magatama Sharingan and razor-sharp reflexes, he never would have evaded so many lethal thrusts. When the final tremor faded, Nathan let out a shaky breath. "Is it over?" he murmured. He surveyed the clearing. What had once been a dense woodland was now a forest of jagged rock columns, their razor tips piercing the sky like silent sentinels. A chill curled up his spine at the sight. Across the ruined grove, the Iwagakure Jonin watched him with a sour frown. It was obvious the Jonin wasn't impressed by the result.